Like, I'm pretty sure I did not invent the zodiac, Pretty sure I didn't invent the planets. I know I'm really awesome and all of that, but I didn't think up the zodiac one day in my basement. You know what I mean? The stuff that I've been talking about for the last 10 years, I'm now noticing a whole bunch of other people are talking about. And we even have coronavirus, which is a Plutonian phenomenon. Pluto
Hmm.
and Scorpio rules biological disease. Technology can't handle how advanced our conversation is.
In the Indian way of looking at the zodiac, they say that Pisces is basically the feet of Vishnu because it's the gateway out, of this level of consciousness and out of Bhuloka. We are technically transhuman already because this is the first extension of, our us being a cyborg.
Think
So
entering Aquarius, it's going to be us getting our minds smashed with scientific discoveries, and it's just going
yeah,
to.
yeah. What I personally feel, even though I'm not saying this from a point of astrology, I'm saying this from a point of some inner abilities of my own, which have suddenly started showing themselves in the past few years when doctors were trying to label me as crazy, basically. Again, my very limited amount of study and research into Vedic astrology, I never found people speaking about Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. First of all, namaste, all the way from India. And I'm really, really happy to be able to actually speak with someone like you because it actually is bringing that same line in my head again and again, which I've seen recently in a couple of your videos where you quote somebody. I think Hunter Thompson is the name, and you quote them saying, "When the weird gets when the going gets weird, the weird get going." And because of that, I'm thankful because I know you are a weirdo on your own. I know I'm a weirdo on my own, and I'm super happy to be connecting over here. And I haven't dived that deep into your work, but I knew that I wanted to dive deep into the person as soon as I came across you. All right. Because I came across you the first time around 5, 6 months ago, I think. And I watched some of the stuff because I'm not somebody who likes to consume a lot. I, gave up on a lot of consumption quite some time ago because also there's like a lot of, fluff out there online. And then I had it in my mind that I will speak with you, and I would love to dive deeper into your journey and how you got to where you are. And then recently I remembered you and I brought up some of your videos again, and I was like, I have to see what you're up to as of now. So really thank you for taking up the time.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that approach too, because I'm trying to be a little bit more personal out there online, not just be
Mhm.
the technical talking head as well. So thank
Mhm.
you. And have we started the interview, by the way? Or are we just
Yeah, so
coming in?
with me it doesn't matter, like the whole thing is organic and free flowing, so
Okay.
this thing is already recording, but just for the sake of the
Okay.
people, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to you, and then I'm going to request for you to give your own introduction because I would not be able to do that the best because you would know your journey better. But I am
Sure.
simply going to let the people over here know that why I resonated with you and why I knew I wanted to speak with you is because I really love the way you express. All right. And why I love it is because I see a lot of poetry in that expression. And in some ways, I find it similar to some of my own expression as well. That was one reason. Another reason was in one of your videos, when I first was watching you around 5, 6 months ago, you mentioned somewhere that you are a Leo cat, something like that. And I'm also a Leo.
Yeah.
Only I'm not that well versed with the Western system, and I'm not an astrology student, but I'm very, very interested in it because there came a point in my life that I had to understand how am I still alive. And that's why for the past 2.5 years, I've been studying this subject like anything. But it's very amateurish probably in its approach because I'm doing it without professionally undertaking it, you know. But luckily, while I began the studies, I came deeper and deeper and found the right kind of voices to learn from. So I'm very grateful. And that is where I resonated with you a lot, and your poetic expression. And personally, I would like to tell anyone who's listening to this that your work is actually not that hard or technical to understand. Like, one doesn't really need to be that well versed with astrological terms to understand your work, because I personally feel you're also a voice for the current set of people who are kind of waking up. That's my understanding of your work, because when you talk and the way you express, one doesn't necessarily need to understand astrology or those terms to actually understand what you're saying. Because if you are one of the people out there who's, waking up or going through a lot of pain or has been in that space where you think you're one of the weird ones, Timothy's work will actually speak a lot to you. And he's actually probably the only person out of all the people I have learned from online or have heard who's, I think, a Western astrologer and does tropical astrology, which is, I believe Western astrology is based on the tropical zodiac compared to the Vedic Jyotish system of the sidereal one. I don't know much about that. I'll get to those questions, but this was just a brief intro about you from my side. And I don't want to go deeper because I would not like to make any mistakes. I would love to know from you who you are and how did you get to where you are. And after that, I've got a set of really, bunch of different questions which might also be a little deep, and that is where I would really love to pick your brains. So please go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Sirhud. And I really appreciate the intro. I love the fact that you pointed out that I'm speaking to a specific demographic. And that's something that I think makes me stand out a little bit as an astrologer. And it's something that did not happen automatically. It's not something that I sought out. It's something that happened over the years of me doing these videos where I started to put this information out there, put this information out there. And then I started to receive this feedback, which is, wow, I am speaking to a very specific demographic of people. And this very specific demographic is in this very specific spiritually minded belief system, which you oftentimes may hear me refer to as the new age. And so I've become self-aware that I'm one of the talking new age people, and I know who that I'm talking to. And so I also have a specific function with my work. In addition to just talking about the astrology, I want to talk to that specific demographic, and I have a specific intention for that demographic. There's somewhere where I find the majority of people are, and there's somewhere that I really want to take people. And so I appreciate that you pointed that out, because a huge percentage of people that find themselves to me in my work are those who have actually experienced struggle or confusion in their spiritual belief system, or they wind up in cults and they end up dealing with narcissists. And then I end up counseling people with narcissistic abuse is what ended up being a huge part of my work as an astrologer. So I'm very devoted to that, in addition to the teaching of the actual technique, which I appreciate you pointing out as well. Because as an evolutionary astrologer, I think this is really exciting stuff, and it's going to continue to be really exciting stuff. Like, I'm super excited by this fusion of Eastern and Western astrology. In India, y'all have preserved the tradition of astrology in your culture. That's a beautiful round of applause thing, because here in the West, it went completely underground. It was completely demonized. It's, literally in the Bible forbidden to teach astrology and this type of thing. So in the West, we have all of these distortions. It went underground. It went very hidden. And what we're seeing now with this fusion between East and West is evolutionary astrology is essentially using a whole bunch of Western techniques, such as the tropical zodiac, which is making a pretty intense comeback even in India. But it's a completely Eastern philosophy. We're talking about reincarnation. We're talking about samskaras. The real work of evolutionary astrology is to identify soul samskaras, as well as the very particular remedies for those samskaras. And that's the real work that I love to do with clients and through my community and YouTube channel. So I got started in this work over a decade ago. It would have been in 2012 is when I really got started. And what actually took me to astrology is I actually was first into Vedic astrology before I got into evolutionary astrology. I was very into Hinduism, unfortunately, what we say in the West. I had a Hare Krishna phase. I was going to temples, meditating, chanting all day, every day. And I had a big spiritual awakening during this time. I also encountered many of the problems in temple life and some of the problems with patriarchal religion, which were later identified in evolutionary astrology. We understand beyond just reading the soul and why our life experience, we are identifying why the culture. why the society, why things have taken the direction that they have over the course of thousands of years, and how that has affected millions of souls. So there's actually deeper agendas to evolutionary astrology, which is to return humanity to nature,
Hmm.
return humanity to natural laws. And how do we honor those natural laws? And what is within religion that is healthy and natural? And what in religion may be man made or constructed and then misleading us into these various ways? Because we do know quite well at this point in time that we've been involved in military society, military style religion for thousands of years. And that, for most of us, is the fundamental issue, problem, pathology. It follows us into our relationships, it follows us
The
into our job.
fundamental disgust, if I may add.
Absolutely. So that's a lot of what got me into evolutionary astrology, why I'm passionate about it, and what I continue to really focus in on.
All right. Wow. Actually, that kind of partially answers my, first ever question when I was going to come to my set of questions, which was I heard you, say this a couple of times that what you do is evolutionary astrology. And I think now I understand a little bit. I think it has to do like the way, for example, science tries to explain the evolution of man over the course of, from a monkey to this thing. I think evolutionary astrology, if I've gotten it correctly, is about the evolution of the species as a connected hive mind, I believe. Is that what you're saying? Going ahead and how we are going to change in the way we relate with each other and how even the species is going to come to understand itself. So you're saying basically evolutionary astrology will go beyond the individual, trying to overall understand humanity and the macro and the micro events that will happen to it. Am I right?
That's definitely a big part of it. That's part of this function that I'd like to introduce. And especially because I'm a YouTube astrologer, I'm talking to thousands of people at a time about, hey, this is what's going on in your life right now. So we're kind of clearly seeing via that reality being proven. Because I also do,
Mm.
Q&As on my community once a month. So the people I work with, we really like, wow, we do experience the same themes at the same time. Wow, that's amazing. There is reality to the zodiac. So that is exposing this deeper function within humanity. There is a hive mind. We do have collective evolutionary direction. Most of
Hmm.
my work one-on-one with clients is to I understand what and why is your life. Why are you having the very particular experiences that you're having? Why are you having the struggles that you're having? It's for good reason, which we say is evolution. So evolution
Mm.
is the fundamental driving force of all life experience, period. That happens on the individual level, that happens on the collective level. And if you can clearly understand what and why those things are, your life becomes infinitely easier because you can start aligning with your soul's own evolutionary intentions as opposed to fighting against the grain. And all of us come with evolutionary intentions, but they come from our soul, which is unconscious. So we don't necessarily know what our soul is trying to do, manifesting the experiences that we have. But all this is very clearly conveyed in the birth chart.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Wow. That actually makes sense because I believe in Vedic astrology, like wherever we came from last, that's the 12th house, which is right behind the first house called the Lagna. And basically, you're not able to see it. But basically, that's the last place from where, you exited your physical form and now you're born again. And that is why understanding a bit of the past life helps you understand why you were born this time and then what meaning can you make out of it in order to align your life better. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And this is what so many of the saints and sages have always said as well, is it's like, yes, we have these soul samskaras, and that's why you're having the experience you're having right now.
Hmm.
Our soul samskaras creates our lifetime. So we even need to reframe how we see these things. We don't want to
Hmm.
say like, oh, we had trauma in the past the way everyone universally has. Most of us are fish in water to PTSD. So we're learning how to heal these things as we
Hmm.
go into the future. So we wouldn't want to say, oh, trauma's bad. I've been traumatized. I'm messed up for life, right?
Hmm.
We identify what those roots traumas are, and then through embracing this journey of healing, those root traumas actually unfold into different gifts. It's like someone who may have experienced some injustice early in their life. That may be the person who is a social justice fighter later in their life. It's what they're passionate about, what they're born. They were kind of made to be that via even these traumas we've experienced. So we
100%.
even get to identify those things in the chart. And it's really about healing. It's not just, I really want to start delivering more of what evolutionary astrology is here to do, because even in the astrology community, there is, as you correctly identified, so much fluff and so much, oh, you're a princess or you're a dragon, and it's just insanity. It's not actually helpful astrology. So I'm very passionate about helpful astrology, and I want to direct people to the right resources. And for that reason, I do apologize because this is a little bit confusing and technical, but I want to make perfectly clear. There are two teachers of evolutionary astrology, and I am teaching Jeffrey Wolf Green, evolutionary astrology. I am not concerned with the other teacher at all. I do not point anyone to the other branch of evolutionary astrology because I find it to be a waste of time. Jeffrey Wolf Green is teaching the most potent, accurate astrology that I have found out there in the world at this time. It's not a very popular branch of astrology. So again, I'm really trying to direct people to which astrology is actually useful. And then let's have measurable results. How far are people healing? How far are people transforming? We want to make astrology as best as it possibly can. That's what I'm really passionate about. And to bring it into a real world, like, let's prove this in real time. Like, yeah, me on YouTube just talking about what's going on, that's very distant. I want to bring it closer. Let's get into groups and let's start discussing about these issues together and finding solutions together to really drive how this thing can help humanity and not just be a newspaper horoscope type of thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for actually sharing, the right source over here. So originally what I wanted to ask you first of all, before I start diving into the questions, because the set of questions I have first are some which, we can hit them quickly, and then I think they'll start getting deeper and will require lengthier answers. But the first one I wanted to ask was, personally, how was January 2024 for you? Inside you, how was it?
Better than the last four, I would say. What I've heard from the world is that this has been one of the most collectively tense and challenging times I've heard. Like I said, I speak to a very specific demographic. These are some of the most nice, compassionate, spiritually oriented people generally. And the feedback I've been hearing from this demographic has not been nice or fluffy recently. So if that's any testament of where we find ourselves in time, even the fluffiest people are starting to complain about the actual reality that's going on, which is music to my ears too, by the way.
And personally, inside you, what kind of emotions or energetic states did you feel in the month of January?
Well, something you're going to hear me talk about this year, and especially when we get to April, because we're going to have our next solar eclipse in Aries. And this is some of the technical evolutionary astrology. We talk a lot about the moon's nodes. This shows the evolution of the soul, the dynamic between past and future. This is not just personality traits we're talking about, folks. So those moon's nodes are simply where the moon orbit conjoins the ecliptic. And this is what also creates the phenomenon of eclipses. So I talk a lot about eclipses and why they're important. And this next one has a lot to do with anger. There is a collective breaking down. There's all of this oppression and bureaucracy and archaic medieval limitation, and humanity's sick of it. We want to step into the future that's going to be so different. It's so pioneering and progressive from where we are now. So right now, there's this loaded spring dynamic that's very tense and wants to lift off. So we're dealing a lot with the collective theme of anger. And again, I'm speaking to a very particular demographic of highly spiritual people. And I have to admit, this demographic sucks when it comes to anger. like I just can't even believe how medieval it is, right? But we're all going to have to use anger in productive ways. So to be totally honest, part of my January is I'm dealing with this anger in a very specific way. And I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to be teaching everybody. How do we use this? We can't set a forest fire. We can't shove it down and pretend that it doesn't exist. We all got to take a stand in highly unique ways. So I'll just really quickly share that at the bottom of the barrel of EA again. We're trying to correct society and culture where it's gone off. And one of the ways it's gone off, especially in West, is the demonization of all sexuality, period. Like in the Victorian era, like sex was literally considered the work of the devil. And now we're in a time where everyone's so messed up because of this puritanical, religion that's been around for so long. So one of the most common things I've come across in my work with clients too is sexual abuse, and how many young vulnerable women have been taken advantage of by guru like predators. And I've been in the front row seat. I've seen this happen time and time and time again, not just one time, not just two times. I've seen this happen many, many times. And I'm starting to get increasingly pissed off. And I'm just the backseat astrologer who's talking to everybody about, what's going to happen next year in their life. I want to be more involved in addressing this issue. There's got to be more exposure of the narcissistic cult leaders, the sexual abuse, and protecting and defending the victim. Because the most common thing that I notice is women who experience this type of sexual abuse are almost always defending or babying their abusers. It's a part of the toxic pathology circle. So it's like some organization, some movement needs to be better made to shine a light on these dark figures and these dark things that goes on behind the scenes in the New Age movement. Because boy, there's a lot of bullshit that takes place behind the scenes here. And I see too much of it to just remain inactive. So
I
that was
understand.
part of my January, honestly.
I understand. I get it. I kind of start having a feeling of like how January was internally for you. And I'm happy that it's starting to turn into a place of strength for you now. I'm actually happy to kind of understand that. So that's great.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that feedback because it is validating.
Thank you. So, all right. So let's start off with a few of the questions which I have. The first one, and it's a very fundamental one because I believe there are these two different systems in astrology: the tropical zodiac and the sidereal. It's a curious case to hear from you that you started with the sidereal and now you've moved to the tropical. I've come across people before who've started from the tropical Western astrology and then gone towards Jyotish and Vedic astrology because I believe that's actually the route where astrology was developed and then it spread in the world or had different systems. I don't know if I'm right or wrong on that, but I believe that's the case. And like,
No
I
one
believe
knows.
people went, sorry?
Nobody knows. This is probably the
Okay.
hottest debate of the day. Yeah.
Okay. So I would love to know from your perspective, in an easy to understand way, for those who do not really know much about astrology, because I myself have started diving into this subject because I believe it's a great tool on the journey of self-examination and self-understanding and self-reflection and self-everything. All right. I That's why I love this. And I believe sooner or later, even I will try to do some kind of, communicative work around this from my own, very amateurish or novice or outsider sitting on the fence and trying to look into this kind of a perspective. So first of all, from you, if we could understand that what exactly is the difference between the tropical and the sidereal, not necessarily in terms of just the technical, but in terms of how does it change the way it applies to us, you know?
Okay. So we're diving straight to the most challenging question first, which is great. I like that. But I do need to I need to give a little bit of a disclaimer because this is delicate. I don't want to
Please.
step on anybody's toes. And I have
Mhm.
so much reverence to those who really dedicate themselves to astrology. And there's a number of different systems, there's a number of different ways to do this. So, first of all, my disclaimer is that I am certain that there is validity to the sidereal zodiac and to Vedic astrology. I personally have not made contact with a Vedic astrologer who has used the system in a way that excites me or I find useful or accurate. I am looking for such a sidereal astrologer. If anyone finds them, please let me know so that way I can change this narrative. I want to say, oh no, sidereal astrology is super awesome. I got this reading. It changed my perspective. That has not happened yet. Instead, I approached through Vedic astrology and I found it to be a very challenging system for what it was that I was trying to get to. And they are very different systems with almost completely different agendas. So, evolutionary astrology is to understand why is your experience the way that it is for evolutionary purposes. So sometimes you get Vedic astrologers that say, oh, Western astrology is only the astrology of the personality. It has nothing to do with the solar spirit. And that's total bullshit. Like, I don't know a branch of astrology addressing the soul or spirit more than evolutionary astrology, whereas Vedic is a completely different system. The way that it's calculated, the techniques that they use is completely different. So there's almost no comparison. I wouldn't even compare the two. Like, they have different functions. Vedic astrology, I normally see very predictive type of techniques. It gets very almost mechanical or procedural. And there's so many different techniques. That's why I can't possibly dismiss the whole system. That would be narcissistic and insane. But they have like techniques for everything. You'll meet your future wife at this time in this place, and she'll have this color hair and these color eyes and these types of things. And I don't know whether that's true or not because I haven't experienced it personally. I'm just not interested in that. That's
I
not
got
my
you.
passion. I want to know why has your life been challenging? Why have you had this redundant experience that you can't seem to get away from? There's sole reasons as to why. The nature itself is set up as to why. In evolutionary astrology, again, it's the actual identification of nature. It's not really a man-made system. And the other interesting thing is Geoffrey Green received this entire system in a single dream, which he received in Sanskrit from Sri Yukteswar, who was Paramahamsa Yogananda's
Yeah,
guru.
yeah. Wow.
So you see
Okay.
there's some bleed through there. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And
wow.
Yukteswar was the original who was working with the tropical and the sidereal zodiac. He's one of the original pioneers.
Yeah.
The sidereal zodiac gets enormously technical. I can't possibly be an expert. I cannot speak about Vedic astrology. I cannot talk about the sidereal zodiac. I am not expert in that area. And there's plenty of people who talk about what I am expert at as if they know, which is why I don't do that. Even the sidereal zodiac, though, it's debated. There can be different sidereal zodiacs. The question for the sidereal zodiac is, what star do you make 0 degrees Aries? Because one of the most inaccurate things that's said about the sidereal zodiac is that it's aligned with the constellations when it is not. The sidereal zodiac is not aligned with the constellations. The sidereal zodiac has 30-degree spaces for the 12 zodiac signs. That's not how the constellations are aligned with the planets. So the sidereal zodiac takes the 0 degrees Aries point and aligns it with a star. And then the whole zodiac goes to that star, which is moving due to precession. What star is considered 0 degrees Aries in the sidereal zodiac is debated amongst sidereal astrologers.
Okay. Okay. So I definitely understand, a bunch of the stuff which you're saying, because when you mentioned that it has too many techniques and it has too much this thing, like this is actually uh one of the only, it's actually the only question I have personally in my life when it comes to thinking to now undertake the study of astrology personally myself, because I've been studying a whole bunch of different subjects, from mythology, which I know also quite a bit about, from mythology to psychology to philosophy, a bunch of these different subjects and their different branches within it. In order to work on myself, I've been doing this from the age of 14. When I started diving into astrology, in the second half of 2021, this is the second time it appeared in my life. The first time was 2013, 2014, but at that time it was out of curiosity and the fortune telling aspect of it, the superstition aspect of it, the stuff which actually astrology is not about, but today's mundane understanding of it in the people basically use it for that. Especially in India, it's more a motive of putting fear in people and selling solutions, unfortunately. Now,
Yeah, that's a problem.
when I dove into it this time, the sheer length and breadth of it actually scares me. And you are right, it can actually be used to figure out at which moment, which particular place, what kind of a person you will meet, who will turn out to be whatever. Like, it is accurate actually to that particular degree. I believe in current times, in the current yugas, like as in the West, we say the Iron Age, Bronze Age, Golden Age, etc. In the current times, it says that the rishis, the sages who actually brought this system to all of us, the way it is encoded in Sanskrit is such that even today the best astrologer will still have an error margin of 8 seconds, but still, I mean, that's quite precise.
I love
That's
those
quite
measurements.
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
exactly. That's quite precise. And when I understood that, and as I started studying and started diving deeper beyond just the YouTubers, the real people, the researchers, or the people who will never be out there in the public, but they're people you would just bow down in front of because they radiate wisdom. I understood that even a lifetime is not enough to study such a divine subject. It's insane. Like I'm talking mostly about Vedic astrology. I'm not sure about the Western one and stuff because I've never explored that much. But I'm happy that you've been my kind of gateway to explanations from the tropical zodiac side of things. So thank you so much for, first of all, giving your take on the tropical versus sidereal this thing. And I understood your viewpoint also on Vedic astrology. Now I would like to
I mean,
start.
that's a good point. If Vedic
Uh,
astrologer is technically much harder and it does take a whole lifetime to learn, then that would explain, and again, whoever can direct me to that sidereal astrologer who's dedicated their whole life, I really do want to meet them and,
Sure, I
and
would, I would, I would love to share some names with you. I don't know if you already know them,
yeah,
and
after we talk, I would love to get your suggestions. Honestly, that's a
yeah,
sincere request. Yeah,
and they were actually so currently the godfather of Vedic astrology is known to be Sri K.N. Rao, K.N. Rao. And he was actually even giving a lot of lectures in the United States in the 90s, I believe, because his even though he never did astrology, I think, as his main profession was something else. He was in the government job or doing something in the public sector. But
it's not
the
uncommon.
yeah, but the gentleman is incredibly, like very, very deep into this. And they say in Vedic astrology, there are basically two eons. One is before K.N. Rao So and one after K.N. Rao So. So his work has been that impactful, especially something which might be of interest to you is he has a bunch of his specialized work, especially around the nodes, the North Node and the South Node, in terms of, understanding them.
Exactly. Good.
Yeah. So you can definitely have a look at him.
I will. I will.
He's
Thank you.
incredibly old now, and he's like he was actually quite close to leaving all of us, I believe, in the last year or something. And people were also worried, but by the grace of God and everything, he's still continuing, and he's amazing. I've just started exploring his work because the better a teacher is, the better I think you need to be as a student to be able to start understanding those kind of teachers. So I still am very, very far away, but for you, it might be something worth checking out. So
Well,
that is
I
one
want to
thing.
call that real quick though, Sarhad, because
Yeah.
that's probably the most common thing I hear back from people who should be doing it.
Ah,
It's the people who question it. Oh, I don't know if I'm not smart enough. I don't know if I have dedicated enough time. All of you all are the people who should be doing it because the people who
mm,
don't question themselves are already doing it, and we need to
mm,
balance this thing out. So I just have to
mm,
point that out first of all. And the next
mm,
thing I want to point out that I think is really awesome that you mentioned about this Vedic astrologer, I am noticing universally that we're discovering cross culturally the moon's nodes has always been the real astrology. You can go to the
100%.
Greeks, go to the Egyptians. It's like this has always been how we've identified the, you could call it the spinal column of the soul. So the dragon's head, the dragon's tail, Rahu Ketu, this is the real astrology. And if you're going to astrologers and they're not mentioning that at all, that to me is a red flag. And I would like
Mm.
to receive the feedback, the statistics, who's got the more accurate or inaccurate astrology, and are they incorporating the moon's nodes?
That's actually completely true because my understanding as of now, from my own very limited, set of research, is that in our language we call it the Navgrahas, the nine planets, right? And in those nine planets, seven are the physical bodies: the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, etc. And then Rahu and Ketu, being two mathematical points, they are not physical planets. They're called shadow planets. But what I understood up until now, that axis, because they're obviously always 180 degrees opposite to each other, that axis gives direction to those seven different kinds of energies of the seven different planets. That's been my understanding up until now. That particular axis, where the north node tells you what you're born for this time, and the south node tells you what you were up doing up until now, whether you were creating a mess or you were winning or whatever the hell you were doing, and it tells you that you already won in this area, and this time you have to focus on this particular area. That is my understanding up until now of the nodes, in a very succinct manner, obviously. And I found that it colors the way the energies of the seven different chakras, planets, consciousnesses, etc., actually is impacting you. The color with which, Jupiter's wisdom will come to you, and the color with which, Mercury's intellect will come to you. Like, that's how I understood it. And I love it that you think the same way. So that's great. Now,
Well, you're validating how on it you already are. I mean, you're already identifying the parts that work, and this is what I'm so passionate about is evolutionary astrology. We actually have techniques that reveals the structure of the soul. And it is not complicated. It does not take a lifetime. It could take a month to learn the system. And then you just start looking at everybody's charts. And then you start seeing it person after person after person. So this stuff can hit the road today. But the simple formula, I'm going to be a broken record now till the day I die, is mostly what house position is your Pluto? What's the house and sign position of your moon's nodes? What are the planetary rulers of those moon's nodes by house and sign? And what you have via that formula, well, there's a friendly bug, is
yeah,
you have the formula for the whole structure of the soul, where the souls come from, the talents and traits it's brought into this life, where the soul wants to go, and what types of experiences it's having in order to evolve in that particular dimension. House position of Pluto, house and sign position of the moon's nodes, house and sign position of the planetary rulers of those moon's nodes. If people can learn this formula, people are not going to be asking what's your sun, moon, rising sign anymore, because that can
yeah,
actually be misleading. This
yeah,
information, if you just take the month to learn this very simple technique, you can start to help every soul you contact
yeah,
until the day you die. And not in a small way, in a
yeah,
very catalyzing type of way to really understand anyone's experience better than you otherwise could.
yeah,
That's what real astrology is.
yeah. Wow. So now I want to start asking, certain kinds of questions which some are personal, and I don't mean personal in terms of my chart, my case. I mean, these questions popped up just in my head because of the way I was experiencing, the transits, especially like whatever's happening in the sky versus how it's affecting me. Now, just to first clarify, I believe we are on the same fundamental level of understanding that astrology is, in a way, the map of our soul's journey through different lifetimes. Am I correct? Both in tropical as well in sidereal. Is that correct?
Certainly, that's a facet of it.
Fantastic. So now what I would like to ask you is that, is it possible for timelines to shift for a particular human being? Now, let's say if a person has a chart in a particular way, and then based on if wherever their Pluto is sitting, wherever their north node is sitting, wherever their sun is sitting, etc., the transits are happening and they're supposed to affect them in a particular way. But is it possible, either because first of all the whole journey of reincarnation into different lifetimes is based on the theory of karma, so is it possible that either via change in your karma or via your consciousness overall evolving, that the chart kind of starts shifting for you, and the events, let's say, which were supposed to happen technically 2 years later, 4 years later, start happening earlier, or the self realizations which you were supposed to have according to the wheel of time which is given in that chart, is it possible for a person to start undergoing all of that at an earlier stage just because of the speed of their own evolution and how they're handling their own evolution?
Amazing question. Wow, just jackpot question. I'm so glad that you asked this because I think this cuts straight to the heart of not only what astrology can be, it cuts straight to the heart with some of the biggest issues around astrology. It cuts straight to the heart around where I see astrologers wanting to be helpful and give advice, and they end up giving damaging advice.
Hmm.
Karma is one of these ideas that can be very damaging to people. Why? Because we say, oh yeah, that really horrible thing that just happened to you, karma, you know, karma. Everything. If you're born into poverty, it's karma. Like this reinforces the caste system, for example, right? So
Hmm.
this is an example of man-made religion, for example, where the caste system is literally like they're untouchable. They're always going to be untouchable forever. Obviously, we know this to be a hugely misleading idea. And it gets reflected in truths because not everybody is on the same level as everybody else.
Hmm.
In evolutionary astrology, we can clearly identify what is any person's stage of evolution. And so we can evolve in a lifetime. We don't necessarily have to. So to
Hmm.
answer your question about what is it that can allow for this change in what the birth chart is and how experiences through life can happen, can that change? First of all, I would say that it can in a certain way, and it
Hmm.
cannot in another way. It gets very complex, and I'll explain why. Where it can change is where we have will, where we have
Hmm.
free will. We don't have total free will. That's why it gets complex.
Yeah.
But given the circumstances that we're in, given the cards that we have dealt, we can play those cards in different ways. And that's the
Hmm.
free will we're given. And depending on how we play those cards, can that absolutely change how our life is going to play out and how events are going to unfold in our life? Absolutely. Where this becomes a little bit more destined and fated, and all astrologers struggle with this free will versus fate
Yeah.
dilemma,
The
because
the
all of us are
balance, the
literally,
ratio,
yeah, because we're
right? The
studying
balance.
this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like how much you, and some astrologers think 0%, some astrologers say 90%. It's like, we're trying to sort this through, because when you have transits, you're going to have those transits at those precise times, no matter what. And
Yeah.
I can do a birth chart reading for an infant child, and I can tell the parents of that child, this child's going to have these types of experiences at these exact times. And the
Hmm.
most intense periods of this soul's life is going to be, these are going to be very intense periods of this soul life, no matter what,
Hmm.
because that's when that soul has Saturn transits, or that's when that soul has Pluto transits. And those transits will occur at the exact moments of those alignments
Hmm.
universally. Doesn't matter what you believe in, doesn't matter what you do in life. Those things are as clear as day. What you see is what you get. And the prediction and the accuracy of astrology is literally hairpin accurate, right?
Yeah.
So, like 2020, when COVID happened, that was
Yeah.
Pluto Saturn in Capricorn. Astrologers predicted that event, maybe
The
not the
great
virus
conjunction. Yeah.
itself,
Yeah.
but we predicted the global calamity for many, many years before it happened. And I
Yeah.
hoped that astrology would make a bigger comeback after all of us predicted that 2020 event. And I almost saw the opposite, which is another really
Yeah.
interesting phenomenon to talk about. Because when you were mentioning actually real astrology is almost too much information, it's like overwhelming how much you learn. That's the actual reason I identified why there's not more real astrologers. People literally can't handle how much truth you're going to hold.
Hmm.
That's why
Hmm.
evolutionary astrology is not a popular branch of astrology. It's actually because it's the realist branch, and people
Hmm.
like can't touch it. It literally is too much. You kind of have to be built for it. So again, your question about free will and what's fated in evolutionary astrology, all souls are evolving. There's different fundamental stages of evolution. For example, the first stage of evolution, which 3/4 of the population is roughly in, is called the consensus stage of evolution. And souls in this stage are only going to be listening, following what their teachers, priests,
Yeah.
politicians, the nation they're born into. They don't really think for themselves totally yet. When
Yeah.
you get into
The
the individualism
sleepwalkers.
stage, yeah, when you
Yeah.
get to the more like quarter of the population that's actually thinking to themselves, that's where you get your Hunter S. Thompsons, your rebels, your pioneers, your leaders. So only a certain percentage of the population is even thinking individually and independently. And then we evolve into more of a spiritual direction. And then even once we get into spiritual evolution, it begins the same way. First, we join a cult. First, we join a church. First, we start following a guru and we do everything the guru says. And then there are stages of evolution that come after that. For example, in India, who are those guys off in the Himalayas meditating in caves? Where are their gurus? Because they're at a
Hmm.
higher stage of evolution. They no longer need to be in the cult. They no longer need to be in the community. They go off into the mountains, develop all sorts of powers. Maybe they come back as a guru, 100,000 lifetimes after that. That's the actual evolution that we map using evolutionary astrology. And I cannot look at any birth chart and measure their evolutionary stage. It is impossible. You cannot look at someone's chart and know where they are as a soul. I have to meet them. And then there's all sorts of ways of meeting somebody. The easiest way is I just look in someone's eye. If you look in someone's eye, you can literally see how awake or sleepy they are in their eye. So that's one way to read soul evolution. And evolutionary astrologers, we learn to read the soul not just through the chart too, because it checks intuition both ways. You check it this way, you check it this way. It's a huge fact checker. But one of the best ways is simply what questions clients are bringing to readings. Are they
Yeah,
asking when they're going to meet their next boyfriend or get their
yeah.
next job? Or are they asking really spiritually in-depth questions like yourself? That's a reflection of soul evolution.
Wow, wow. Um, I'm just, I know, for lack of a better term, like I'm getting turned on in all the crazy places with questions bursting in my head now based on all the things which you just said, because you
Excellent.
touched on a you touched on a bunch of things which already I have questions on towards the latter half of this. But literally, when you said this, right, both about the mass consciousness, where I use the term sleepwalkers, and I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I in a way, a derogatory way. I mean that in the way that it's unfortunate that with the kind of power we have when we are born as a human, that we give up our sovereignty and our freedom to everything which is being bombarded onto us, and everybody is actually being puppeteered and choreographed while they're thinking that, wow, look, I'm on Instagram and I'm one of the cool people, or something like this, something like that. Whatever is being established as the status quo and the hierarchy, people are just kind of very, very blind. And why that particularly hurts me, and why my work is also kind of parallel to yours and trying to help people wake up to their own sovereignty. That's what I actually care about a lot, and their own freedom, which I do have another question coming up with regards to Aquarius towards the latter half of this. I really hope that people actually enter that zone of themselves, because it's actually going to revolutionize their whole life, the way they look at everything, what they place value on. Because otherwise, whatever they're placing value on is based on consensus. Just the way you said that, for example, if somebody starts waking up, they're forceful join a cult, because alone they're afraid that other things which are happening to me, am I going crazy or am I going psychotic? Or because the first thing which happens as soon as you start waking up is you're going to get isolated, depression is going to hit you, because a lot of reality is hitting you. And when reality will hit you, first of all, it'll start destroying your ego, right? It'll start destroying your worldview. It'll start destroying the way you fit yourself into the world. And then you have to come back to zero and, start from a foundation of truth, wherever your understanding of truth is. So that's great. And I love that, you said that about the 75% of the population being kind of over there, and 25% who are trying to practice their own free will and stuff. And in the Vedic system, we actually have three different kinds of karma, which kind of correlate to this. We have the prarabdha, where people are born with, such as the chart, and then you have kriyam and karma, which is your free will. And obviously, everyone has a different set of checks and balances when it comes to all of that. So coming to this particular thing, when you mentioned about the 25%, so let's call them the weird ones. All right. And that is where I want to bring that quotation which you used of Hunter Thompson, if I'm saying the name correctly, that he says that when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. Because I believe I'm in that school, not pro or whatever, weird, simply the outcasts, the outsiders, the ones who, for whom a lot of the stuff hit even way before 2020. Because I believe 2020 was like also a catalyst kind of a time period where a lot of people, all of a sudden, the noise outside shut down, so they had to listen to the noise inside, and a mass awakening kind of did start. But I'm sure for you it had started a long way back, otherwise you would not be on this path the same way it started for me quite a long way back. That's why I had to change my path quite a lot. So I believe we are kind of the weird ones, or the ones who were alone or might still be alone in some ways, and have gone through a lot of different kinds of experiences. So can you explain from your own point of understanding, with the coming year 2024 as well as the coming time, keeping astrology a little bit aside, just from your own sense of understanding the world, the way you are noticing consciousness overall, regardless of whether planets exist or not, what is going to happen for the weird ones now?
And that's another really great question. And I have to admit, Sarhad, like I'm really excited for you to get deeper into evolutionary astrology because, similar to me, a lot of your thinking and a lot of these questions are going to get so validated, and it's stuff that you already know. That's how it was for me. That's why I got so passionate about it. I didn't realize that I already was a soul detective, mapping out these issues in culture, my life, my family, way before I got all the validation from evolutionary astrology. And then I was just like, oh, okay, let's go. Everything makes sense now. So even your question about sovereignty goes back to evolutionary stages. Because the
Mm,
first stage is consensus, which means the stage that comes after that, you develop individuality, which is sovereignty. So sovereignty is an actual stage of evolution. And this even occurs within the spiritual stage of evolution, where at first there's a consensus stage where, again, people line up and they get their guru and they go and they do their rituals and they're purifying their karma. They are eliminating their ego and becoming more compassionate, more devotional. That happens in the first stage of evolution. Now, what I hope to be teaching more about is how religion and the priestly class, pretty much across the board, all cultures, in the last few thousands of years, they constructed man-made religion to kind of cut out the stage in between following the guru and just being a guru. And there's all sorts of stages in between. And we want to be able to identify so that way we're not lining up for a false guru, because there are souls that may be more evolved than us that are not even close to being in the stage of guru. So in the West, again, astrology was outright demonized. It was thrown under the bus. It was called witchcraft.
yeah.
And the people who are witches, and there are still, circles of witches, and it's still preserved, again, not consensus, but in very small, sovereign, individual, hidden places. And what witchcraft is largely about is sovereignty. It's about having a direct connection to God as opposed to having to go through religion or go through a priest or even go through a guru. And that is a certain stage of spiritual evolution that happens as well. Is there's an initial stage where we're lining up for a guru, we are spiritualizing and we're purifying, and we eliminate our ego. And then
Mm.
there's another stage that follows where the soul starts to cultivate a direct relationship with God. And once that direct relationship with God begins to get cultivated, that's when life starts to get increasingly more interesting. That may be when the soul itself starts to develop increasingly God-like powers. Now, what is the soul to do with those godlike powers? What tends to result is that the soul's ego gets re-inflamed. So you
Mm.
may have people in an initial stage of spiritual development that are eliminating their ego, becoming more and more humble, and then they get powers and their ego re-inflames.
The
Now, the people
spiritual
that
ego.
that's right. And the people with the small ego, they may look to someone with their ego inflamed and they say, ew, that's a
Mm.
witch. Let's burn them at the stake. In fact, this
Mm.
is what happened during the Dark Ages here in the West. So we actually need to evaluate gurus as well, because for just a really quick example, Osho is not someone that I would put in the actual stage of guru. I say Anandamayi Ma and
Mm.
Ramakrishna, let's
Mm.
set the bar high, because the issue with Osho is he posed as a guru when he wasn't quite there. He had cultivated certain powers, but had he really mastered how to effectively disseminate those powers? There's some mixed feedback that we get there. And that's another way of measuring a soul
Sorry,
spiritual.
Timothy, can you hear me? I've just lost you. Yeah. So you were talking about Osho, and then after that, you mentioned about people like Anandamai Ma as well as
Yeah, and
Ramakrishna.
I don't want to throw any of the Osho guys under the bus
No, no,
either,
please,
because
please,
the
please
point
speak your
is,
heart out. Yeah.
well, the point is this is a complex life. So if we put someone up on the stage of guru and say they're all perfect, that's where a whole bunch of problems can happen. So, there are good things that Osho was doing, and there are some very misleading things that Osho was doing. I'm using him as an example of a soul that had evolved into acquiring certain spiritual powers, but not yet to the stage of guru. And there are plenty such figures all across India.
Mm.
So another way of measuring a soul's spiritual evolution is the effect that they have on the surrounding world. I'd rather point the finger to, Mata Amritanandamayi Ama, the effect
Yeah.
that she has had on the world, the charitable reach, how much education and bringing money into poverty-stricken places. That's an example of what a guru should be, do, and look like.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. I get you. So, for you, the defining observation where, the line to take inspiration from Osho should stop for you personally is basically where um, he, for
Osho's not
example,
God, right? A
yeah.
guru is someone who's so close to God, they're God. Osho's
Mhm.
not such a figure.
Mm,
And this
mm,
should
mm,
be objectively tested. This is a spiritual truth. And this is, again, I hear these issues where the new age and some of these more spiritual, fluffy people, they don't get that you need to be real and you should
mm,
be testing your guru. You should put your guru to the test, not
mm.
blindly following them without testing them. No guru would want to be blindly followed. They
Yeah,
want to be tested. They are God incarnate. That's what guru is meant to be. If you don't
yeah,
put that to the test, boy, can you get into trouble.
yeah. I understand. Wow. All right. So coming back to the question, which was about the quote regarding, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. So that's what I was asking you. What do you think is going to happen to the weird ones going ahead in this period of time?
Yeah, they're going to turn pro. I got the feeling that you're turning pro right now too, Sarhud. you
Thank
know,
you.
one of the things, there's going to be a bunch of things that I'm saying, but it's like,
Hmm.
again, we're evolving out of this puritanical culture that suppressed individuality. You're supposed to look like the same good boy or bad or good boy or good girl in order to get into
Hmm.
heaven, and every religion's designed this in certain ways. And what I'm saying about the future is every individual is going to get their 5 minutes of fame.
Hmm.
If you don't have a really unique and weird sexual kink or sexual fetish, you're actually going to be less popular a few
Hmm.
decades from now because everyone's going to want to have one of those.
Hmm.
It's going to be a time of celebrating subculture in
Hmm.
addition to all of the technological progress, because we're all going, if we're already cyborgs, so let's like get
Hmm.
over that. A lot of
Yeah.
the natural people, they're like, technology is going to take over. You're already a cyborg. You're on your phone all day, every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
That officially means it's an extension of our consciousness.
Yeah.
So we're already there. That's
Yeah.
just going to continue to rapidly progress so many times over. But what that brings is a whole new level of human ingenuity as well as freedom. Like you
Hmm.
really can create your own digital world now. We're going to have to design all new sets of laws. We're going to have to, create different bubbles of,
Hmm.
because it's going to increasingly be this phenomenon of isolation,
Hmm.
like how the internet has already made us more isolated, and
Hmm.
it's proven that it's causing us to be more depressed, for example. So
Hmm.
that's increasing while we're simultaneously getting more interconnected.
Hmm.
And we're specializing while we're getting more isolated. This is a Leo Aquarius polarity
Hmm.
phenomenon. And we're going to
Hmm.
see the best and the worst of both facets. One quick example,
Damn.
too, is you have the example of Aquarius here in America, where the idea is every person gets to be free. So we're all
Hmm.
cowboys firing shit, and we get the craziest shit here in that way. And then we have Aquarius in countries like China, where they're actually designing a literal hive mind,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
everybody functions as, so you have two different types of nationalism now. You have American Aquarius nationalism, which is everybody goes free for all for yourself, and then you have
Hmm.
Chinese bred Aquarius nationalism, which is we are superior because we are all a part of China. And we're
Hmm.
going to see this clashing between these two lifestyles increasingly happen. It's going to get intense.
I though personally, I personally see both the countries disintegrating in some way. I mean, I'm not part of either of the countries, and I'm purely, putting my observations out as an outsider. But I'm seeing America collapse on itself in a lot of ways, especially with regards to the culture. And then in terms of China, I'm seeing the amount of control which is there is so severe and so strong that the souls over there are kind of craving to come out of all of that and actually experience themselves, because up until now they're actually only getting to experience the hive mind side of their existence, you know and in the United States, what I've seen is individualism hyper accelerating in very misguided or misunderstood ways, that people are collapsing within themselves, because also it's the place of too much comfort, too much convenience. And these are two different ways in which I'm seeing both of them kind of, crushing themselves. Am I making sense over here?
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I'm have to sadly admit I'm seeing it more falling apart here in America. And it
Hmm.
does get reflected again in these spiritual beliefs. Again, this very specific demographic that I'm oftentimes reaching have these new age beliefs that you literally create your own reality. And then
Hmm.
there's this whole positive manifestation fad that's been popular for the last century here, which is you literally create your own reality with your thoughts. And
Hmm.
not only is that the most narcissistic belief system on the planet you could possibly have, not only is it not true and misleading, it's thoroughly against the notion of astrology, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like, I'm pretty sure I did not invent the zodiac, pretty sure I didn't invent the planets. I know I'm really awesome and all of that, but I didn't think up the zodiac one day in my basement. You know what I mean? There's a
Yeah.
lot of people who are literally so narcissistic, they're on a spiritual platform making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling that snake oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, this is stuff I'm pinpointing and being just like, yeah, that type of individuality you just
Yeah.
mentioned here in America, it is a problem.
No, you're 100% right. Like, I personally have become like, social media is somewhere where I myself started my journey, because I don't come from, like a business family or very well-to-do family. And I entered a line of work trying to serve people where I did not have any qualifications, did not have any contacts. I literally started actually from a wheelchair. I was in a wheelchair for half a year at that time, and I started like that. Um, and a few years into that journey, the way even social media changed, where everybody is selling dreams in webinars, all right, it pissed me off to that level that in the past 3, 4 years, my heart has totally become disconnected with it. I don't like to go there. I don't like to express anymore over there. I still love to express, and I do it, via Telegram, for example, or in my own personal ways. But earlier, I used to yearn to, go there and use the platform to serve people, because it was very open and it was to give people an opportunity. But then it became I think that is not just an algorithm. I think it is running people on an algorithm now, where even
Yes.
like they say these are places for creators. I personally believe these are places for imitators now. And everyone's using formulas to run their work over there, where it's straight away defeating the purpose of why these technologies came. And I'm going to come back to that in a question later. I want to ask one final twist on that particular question of the weird and the weird turning pro, because just before we spoke today, I wanted to check up on what you've been up to lately, and I had a brief look at your Pluto entering Aquarius video, where you said about the people who have been thinking that I've been doing this for so long, I don't really think I can go on anymore. Because in my own line of work, I'm trying to help a lot of people who are over there. My own journey itself is also kind of like that. So I would like to understand, how exactly do you see that shift happening? I mean, I'm sure it's going to happen individually to everyone, but for those who have been bearing the pain, the isolation, the self questioning, the doubt, the loneliness, so many different things, and in a way that no matter what they've been trying for has not been working, how do you see them turning pro coming up ahead? Do you see the times changing for them, or do you see them changing according to the times, for example?
Both. And it's another really complex question. So I got to, kind of break it down layer
Please.
by layer. But again, I'm just so excited by your train of thought. And by the way, I'm also super excited to be doing this interview because when you identified that algorithm change, like 2/3 of my business went down the drain. And I
Yeah.
started speaking more starkly and more intensely against these collective problems, and that just made me even more unpopular. So I watched the whole world go crazy in the last few years, and it's been very
Same.
disheartening. I did too. I thought it was personal. I thought it was because of me and my old drama that you may know about with my old sexual abusive, mentor.
Hmm.
But no, it wasn't personal. It was universal. And often it was a lot of the really good astrologers lost a lot of their following to this algorithm change, COVID, the whole astrological community went insane. I was just trying to tell people, listen, people don't get COVID because they're low vibe, because 3/4 of the new age was literally shaming each other for getting sick and this type of stuff. It's like, can you
Oh, wow.
literally aim a gun and shoot the person who needs support and compassion the most?
Mm,
The New Age movement disturbs me because you have these rich assholes that just get away with
mm,
anything they want to by designing these types of beliefs.
mm,
So when you were saying, uh, I used to be on, Instagram and these platforms. It used to be for creators. Now it's for imitators.
mm.
That is so true. And you know what? The weird are not imitators.
Yeah, exactly.
Weird are just outright weird. So again, you have 3/4 of the population in consensus. What are those guys going to be doing? They're going to be riding coattails of
Yeah,
the weirdos. And
yeah.
the weirdos set the precedent. Like the stuff that I've been talking about for the last 10 years, I'm now noticing a whole bunch of other people are talking about. They don't
Mm,
remember that they got the idea from me 10 years ago because I'm
mm,
actually front running this stuff. So we're going to see astrology catch on. We're going to see new beliefs catch on. Obviously, there's going to be less guru narcissist men in the role of astrologer, abusing cords of women, because that was happening really commonly, actually, just a
mm,
few years ago. So we're going to see all of these shifts. We're going to see all the Instagrammers run their mouth and talk about all these things. Just like
mm,
I heard so many people, these like energy readers, oh, we're entering a year of it being weird. It's like,
mm,
okay, why? Did you just
mm,
copy an astrologer and you're just spouting?
mm,
The amount of copycat that goes on in the astrological community, the new age community, it's just literally everyone's just selling their cacao ceremony. Nobody knows what to do. So the
mm,
reason why the weird goes pro is we're the
mm,
ones that are actually leading it. We're the ones that are actually doing it. And we do it via our own makeup. We don't have a
mm,
choice. We were born the way that we are. We can't fake it. We can't
mm.
suppress and conform and be just like, yeah, I'll work a 9 to 5 desk job for the insurance company. We're not built to do that. So
Exactly.
the intelligent people that have gotten restricted in those roles are not meant to be there. And starting
Mm,
this next, start in 2020, like you said, because people are just like, wait a minute, why am I doing my job the way that I'm doing it? That was the number one takeaway of 2020. Everyone suddenly was working from home. And now
mm,
everyone's just like, wait a minute, why was I ever even going into work in the first
mm,
place? So there's
mm,
this huge reprioritization. All the death was a big part of the reprioritization too. Like I've got limited time. Do I want to be going to my job until the day that I die? So yes, this huge shift is happening, but it's dependent on how brilliant you are and how much you've been suppressed is how big you're just about to explode. And
wow.
that's where the weird is going pro. And there's,
Wow.
I'm trying to design my community to be more than just astrology. I want to design a community that supports the weird going pro. I want
Wow.
to use the birth chart to identify, yes, this is your soul. Yes, this is what you were born to do. How can we as a community pool our resources together to help one another to liberate out of these prisons and actualize our gifts in highly unique ways? That's the direction I really want to see Rasa Leela healing go into. It's Rasa
Lovely.
Leela healing. The
I
idea goes
know.
back to the Rasa Leela dance.
Hmm.
Krishna duplicates himself and dances with every gopi in the way that every gopi desires in her particular heart. So the Rasa Leela dance is actually honoring cosmological reality. Each of us has a divine dance with God that is highly unique. We are not taught about that highly unique dance in religion by priest or by culture or society. We have to liberate ourselves as the divine weirdos that we are. That's when the rubber hits the road, and it's not just believing what I'm saying, it's proving it. And that's what I'm excited.
100%. I'm so happy to hear these words come out of your mouth because they're a literal parallel to what I don't know how aware you are of the things that I do, but like one of the things which I do is called the free man, in which the man stands for mankind and the free stands for literally freedom as well as sovereignty, because exactly what you said, like working on everyone's individuality collectively, you know the kind of mission you have with your own community, and that's lovely, and I would also love to be a part of that if it's possible. and contribute in any way that I can. And I love it. I absolutely love it. So
Of
kudos to you
course.
for doing
The
something like
way that
this.
that works is I tune in every individual and it's what do you need? What are you passionate about, and then we start a loop there because I want everybody
Mm,
on with what they're passionate to do. And there's so many teachers, healers, medicine men and women that haven't gotten the opportunity to
yeah.
share what they're expert at. So I want to use a little bit of the following and the platform that I've built to help get people out there in the ways they're really passionate and should be out there in the world. But again, we have a very bureaucratic society and culture and system,
Mm,
and it works against such people.
yeah.
Artists and musicians, obviously. I want to also
Yeah.
be supporting them because they just get squashed by the culture and society. And really,
Yeah.
those are the people that are medicine women, usually at their core, so they're needed at the front, not the back.
Yes. Yes. Lovely. Lovely. Uh, Now I want to bring attention to these three lovely little far out planets. Not really little, they're quite huge, but like they're far out. Because when you see the Vedic charts, when you see the Lagna charts, the D1 charts, the Jyotish charts, which anyone can, go online, get out their own chart using their own birth details. What I did not find up until now, in again my very limited amount of study and research into Vedic astrology, I never found people speaking about Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. All right.
Mhm.
But I do know that coming from Greek mythology and a bunch of different Western schools of thought, like they all have their own very important role. Like I believe Pluto was Hades, in the Greek mythology, and then you have Neptune as the lord of the seas, which is very similar to the sun god Varuna, one of the 12 Adityas, coming from our own Vedic system. But he was a prehistoric god now. Basically, he was before this particular set of time. But like, I wanted to understand, not just from Western astrology, but from your understanding of the consciousness of these three planets. I only have very limited understanding of one, which is Pluto, because that little bugger is way on the outside, but is plutonium when it comes to its energy, like it's atomic energy, literally, right? And the understanding I had from whenever I explored this a little bit, now I don't remember if this was in a conversation with somebody or this was via my own studies, that Pluto they refer to as Shiva, all right, which was very interesting for me as to like the small planet going all the way outside. But then it made sense to me because Shiva has a lot to do with consciousness in the way Indians kind of understand Shiva, or like rather coming to the root or the zero-ness of consciousness, basically, to the point of liberation, to the point of dropping everything else, embracing your weirdness, etc., etc. I understood that, but can you please shed some light on these three planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto? And why is it that, for example, even in the Vedic system, I'm seeing them in the charts, but I'm not seeing anybody talk about them. I'm not seeing them being used in any of the techniques, even though I do believe they will have obviously an impact. Otherwise, even in the Vedic system, they would never plant them on the chart, you know. But regardless of Vedic, regardless of Western, regardless of Sidereal, regardless of tropical, your understanding of the consciousness of these planets, I would love to know.
Again, all your questions are awesome. I hope this interview goes everywhere. I would love to be a little bit more hard hitting answering this question. I'm going to be a little
Please.
bit more political because this isn't so much a tropical versus zodiac debate. These
Mhm.
are physically existing objects in space. And not
Mhm.
only do you have Vedic astrologers saying, we don't look at those outer planets, we have traditional Western astrologers that are saying, we don't look at those planets. We only look at the primary seven. Those are the only seven that actually matters. So I'm going to cut this, snip this rose in the bud because that's absolute insanity. Any astrologer can track the outer planets. It doesn't matter what branch of astrology you are. It doesn't matter what zodiac you're reading. Everyone should track when Pluto goes over someone's moon, or Pluto goes over someone's sun, or Pluto goes
Mm.
over any planet or makes any planetary aspect to any planet in anyone's chart. What happens in that person's life? because
Mm.
Pluto transits are the most catalyzing, cataclysmic, intense atom bomb being dropped, death and rebirth. I mean, when Pluto goes over someone's moon, I'd like the actual statistics to be developed, and there are organizations that are gathering these statistics. What is
Wow.
the chances of your mother dying being increased? Is it 75% increase? What are the chances that you're going to move when Pluto goes over your moon? Is it a 75% chance increase? I want to see those statistics, because the folks that are out there
Mm.
saying the outer planets don't matter, I'm going to call them out as being stupid. Like, if you're an astrologer, you need to be studying, you need to be applying the scientific method, and this stuff is easy to see. This isn't hard to see. The people who aren't paying attention to the outer planets are trying really hard not to pay attention to the outer
Mm.
planets. They're going to go extinct very soon. This stuff is very measurable and testable. So
Mm-hmm.
evolutionary astrology is a front runner in really identifying these outer planets. And we also have to say the seven planets that, through Saturn have been studied by the ancients since the beginning of time. So there's a lot more evidence, statistics, and culture and tradition behind those seven planets. Interestingly enough, the Mayans knew about Uranus, which is fascinating because Uranus is not possible to be seen by the naked eye, but somehow the Mayans had identified Uranus as a planet.
Mm.
Okay. So these outer planets are actually very, very important. The functions that they rule, how they affect consciousness, but they're more complex than the inner planets. The inner planets is easy. It's Mercury is your mind, Mars, your sexuality, Venus, your senses, Moon, your emotions and your sense of home, So the outer planets rule much more psycho-spiritual functions. Like this
Mm.
whole weird going pro is a Uranian function. Hunter S. Thompson was a Uranus soul. Jeffrey Green, the founder of EA, is a Uranus soul. So Uranus rules this function of breaking down Saturnarian conditions.
So
And I
basically,
actually
a
have,
power of innovation.
yes,
Mm.
specifically. And there's a dimensional shattering with Uranus, which is why when you have, say, Uranus go over the moon, as I did the last 5 years, I moved like 6 times.
Hmm.
Uranus transits bring shocking, sudden,
Yeah.
unexpected shifts. And again, this stuff is as easy as day to measure. When Uranus goes
Yeah.
over someone's Venus, are they going to be in the same relationship they were? Chances are no. They're going to go through a
Mm.
highly experimental phase. So Uranus is when the weird goes pro. We have shocking, sudden events. Tears the rug from under our feet. The future, which is Uranus, gets brought in faster than we know what it is. The future is
Mm.
unknown. So Uranus rules the higher mind. It's a very right brain intuition. Uranus also rules non-linear time. So when Saturn is this linear time, Uranus is more this non-linear time. And when we experience a traumatic event, such as having the rug ripped out from under our feet, our consciousness shatters. Uranus rules this phenomenon of consciousness shattering as well as being reintegrated back together. People who experience trauma know what nonlinear time is like, because you go out of body and forget, and then later on in your life you have these memories come back. That is all Uranus function. Really
Mm.
useful stuff for therapists to be learning.
Yeah.
Neptune is the most enigmatic. Neptune would be the most challenging planet of any to talk about, because Neptune really rules the collective consciousness. Neptune is the phenomenon of boundarylessness. If you have a Neptune transit over a specific planet, that planet basically dissolves. And we have all sorts of confusion. So, if, for example, Neptune transits our moon, the moon is our ego. The moon is our self identity, how we relate inwardly to ourselves. So when Neptune goes over the moon, we lose what our identity is. And we're like, who are we? And what's the purpose of life? What are we doing? Again, these are like universal. Look at any Neptune transit, any person's moon, and just see what types of experiences that they're having. So
Yeah.
Neptune is this collective consciousness. It also rules this phenomenon of boundarylessness, bleed through. So how and where we are all one. It rules phenomenon such as spiritual sacrifice. Pisces can go into danger because highly Pisces people can become too sacrificial or too nice, so on and so forth. But the example of an avatar embodying Neptune would be Jesus on the cross. That he brought in the age of Pisces, but we could also say Vishnu is Neptune.
Mm.
Vishnu is
Hmm.
always incarnating to preserve goodness. And that's a part of the function of Neptune. Neptune's very much a very spiritual, nebulous, confusing, mysterious, Krishna like planet.
Wow.
And Pluto, I think, correlating with Shiva is right on because you have the destructive potency that's simultaneously creative. But what Pluto's job is to do is to bulldoze. That's transmutation. So we think everything's falling apart, but it's actually getting transmutated into something brand new and different. Again,
Hmm.
2020 was we had Pluto, that transmutation function, meets Saturn, the structure of society.
Hmm.
And we have a total atom bomb dropped. And we even have coronavirus, which is a Plutonian phenomenon. Pluto in
Hmm.
Scorpio rules biological disease. So
Hmm.
that's how straightforward and literal astrology is. You have Pluto, biological disease, conjoined Saturn in Capricorn, and we have this
Hmm.
total transformative rewrite of all society. So any astrologer is not looking at Pluto post 2020, you have to give me a break. That is just hilarious. And in the birth chart, Pluto is actually one of the most heavyweight planets. Jeffrey Green's first book, Pluto One, mostly takes Pluto through the 12 houses. And you read about what that means to have Pluto in any particular house. And it's going to be all about your past lifetimes, all about the very particular experiences you have throughout this life. And so, believe it or not, the house position of Pluto is one of the most relevant heavyweight placements in any person's birth chart.
Wow. Wow. So, thanks so much for giving your take on this because with again, whatever limited studies I've done in the past 2.5 years, I had a very similar understanding that I do believe these three have an impact right now, but my explanation um, for the observation that basically nobody's talking about these three that much, and my understanding was that these three are not just for this dimension; they're in a way for the next dimension. All right, so this was what my understanding was in terms of that. Most people, unfortunately, are gonna be bounced around by life happening to them instead of them happening to life. And when life is happening to them, what is going to end up happening is that only the seven physical grahas, along with the two nodes, are going to have the maximum impact on their life. And I knew this thing about Uranus being this sudden shocking change, and I had this understanding about Pluto and Shiva and complete destruction and complete rebirth, etc. But the way you put it across, especially with the way of understanding time as not just the Saturnian way of the tick tock, slow steps, past, present, future, one straight line, compared to a different dimensional understanding of time, which is very non-linear, to be coming from these. This is very interesting because the way my chart is, right? I think it's a little unique on its own, and not I don't think about that in a superiority manner. I think that's the reason why I've been fucked so much in the past 10 years, especially that question which you that thing which you brought about somebody going through trauma and then completely shattering, and this thing that happened to me so many times now, which is why I said that I started studying astrology, trying to understand how am I still alive. That my goal in life now is to become nothing. It's not that I want to become the next this particular person or I want to become this in my life. I want to become nothing because that's the amount to which everything got shattered. That when I had to bring my attention or my being to the level of nothingness that I was shattered to, I discovered so much power over there that I'm very happy being nothing now. You know?
Well, that's the stuff I want to talk to you in a reading about because we'll see
Oh,
that in the chart, what and why, and it'll be very straightforward. We'll be able
so,
to validate that for you.
wow. So in the Vedic chart, almost all the planets are on the north node and south node axis. All right.
Cool. Well, you definitely got to learn some EA. That's important stuff. We're kind
All
of the
right.
moon's little astrologers. Yeah.
And especially when you spoke about the moon and these particular planets going over the moon, because the moon is in a lot of ways our perception, the way we are looking at the world, the way we are understanding the world. Our own matrix is basically our own moon in a lot of ways. Because again, in coming to our own shastras, it says the moon is basically your manas, your mind. and that is why they call it, like some of the most learned astrologers will call the moon the biggest devil, not Saturn, not Rahu, but they will call the moon the biggest devil because it keeps changing, right?
A
Now,
little patriarchal of the idea, but yes.
yeah, for sure, could be. And for me, it's been a horrific challenge because I've got the North Node and the Moon together, and then I've got Neptune there, and then I've got Uranus there. But nobody talks about the Neptune and the Uranus, and also it's a Vedic chart, so it's a different thing. But thank you so much for your explanation on Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, and this thing. So now I'm going to go one step deeper into the same line of questioning, focusing just on Pluto. Because I do know the Great Conjunction happened in 2020 and the world came to a grinding halt. But that was at the collective level, right? At an individualistic level, for a lot of us who were born, in the 90s or the early 90s, like I believe all of us, I don't know if the position of Pluto also changes too much based on sidereal or tropical, but I do believe all of us kind of had it in Libra, if I'm not wrong, around that time or something like that. But like at an individual level, a planet which moves so slow, like I think 240 years or something, right, to complete one orbit, something like that. A planet that moves so slow, will that have the maximum level of governance in a human being's life, even though our understanding and interpretation of it is lesser than, the seven physical planets which we can see? Because it there's something about it which makes me curious again and again. And I would love to know a little deeper level of insight from you just on this one particular one.
Yeah, again, you're cutting straight to the heart. I mean, there's a lot of confusion, and it's because it's a very complex reality in which we're discussing. So there's different levels, and this is the stuff I really teach in my astro schools. How do we understand these different dimensions and levels, and then how do we put it all together? Because you see all of it in the chart. Yes, you're back.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening. Maybe
No
because we're
problem.
talking about these kind of energies that, they're
That's it.
like, yeah.
Technology can't handle how advanced our conversation is.
Could you please
No,
begin
it's
your
all
answer
good.
again?
No problem. No problem. So, what I was saying is that, again, we have these different levels, these different dimensions. We see all of it in the birth chart, which is why the chart gets confusing to read. So, a lot of what I'm teaching in the astrology school I teach is what these different dimensions mean, how we can read those different dimensions, and then bring them back together. So, for
Hmm.
example, the zodiac itself reflects the process of all life phenomenon on Earth.
Hmm.
The planets rule all life phenomenon on Earth. And with the zodiac and the planets, it is concise. Mercury in Gemini does what Mercury in Gemini does. No other planet, no other sign does another planet's or sign's function. So that's what we get really studious at as astrologers, as we learn to identify, okay, these are the actual parts and pieces. Is this a man-made system? No. These are the parts and pieces as designed by God. And then we prove it by correlating observation using the scientific method. There is no belief in any astrology whatsoever. So the zodiac reflects this collective evolution where we begin with Aries, we're separated at the umbilical cord from our mother, we're individual, we are born via carnal desires, and we need to get experience. And we don't want to shame Aries. We all are born for those reasons and for good reasons. But
Hmm.
we end up in Pisces. We go through the individual subjective journey, then we learn about relationships in Libra and especially in Scorpio, and then we start to get towards philosophical ideas in religion like Sag, and then we go back out there in the world in Capricorn. We
Hmm.
find our societal obligation because we're not just born for a vacation, we're born to do some
Hmm.
work, and we discover that work out of our heart via compassion. So Pisces is where we all end up, which is where our individuality goes full circle back to the collective. And we have a feeling of meaning, and we have a feeling of being connected to something bigger than just ourselves. And that's what I'm working with all my clients. I want to
Hmm.
take your individual gifts and bring it back to a collective offering. For example, if we can get that in a job or career, which is not necessarily guaranteed in this day and age,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
if we can, that's really a jackpot to align what someone's born to do, and it also pays the bills. Wouldn't that be nice?
Hmm.
Wouldn't
Hmm.
it be nice if we could get more people there? I think we need more trained astrologers on the planet. Maybe that could
Hmm.
be helpful. Now, there's misconceptions with this idea. For example, if we saw someone with all of their planets in Pisces, does that mean that that soul is necessarily more evolved? Does that mean that that soul is necessarily spiritual or really charitable or really loving? Not necessarily. So there is much more complex evolution that's taking place. But your question about the outer planets, these outer planets govern very profound spiritual evolution. So, the consensus stage is not going to know these outer planets aside from Uranus ripped the rug out from under my feet, Neptune dissolved my life, and Pluto dropped the bomb and destroyed everything. They're still going to have those transits, whether they believe in astrology or not, whether they are living their life before the discovery of Pluto or not, because you can go
Mm,
back and study so many historical Pluto transits, and Pluto always drops the bomb right on time.
mm,
So those planets rule all sorts of functions, life experience, but it's only going to be for souls that are really in a certain stage of spiritual evolution that are going to be understanding things like Neptune, the collective consciousness. When you meditate, you start tuning into Neptune, the collective consciousness. There's a whole bunch of people on the planet who thinks meditation is just a way of relaxing your mind. So there's going to be certain levels of understanding that, again, it depends on the soul's evolution. And then, depending on that soul's evolution, their life, their birth chart, what that means, how that's going to unfold, you can only tell that by reading the soul's evolutionary stage, which you cannot even see in the birth chart alone. Again, you have to make some contact with the soul.
mm, mm. I get you. Yeah, because, the simplest academic, you know, viewpoint, which makes me understand what you're saying even much better, because till now I've never come across anyone talking about any of these three particular planets owning any of the signs in the zodiac, because the signs in the zodiac have been given ownership, by the seven different physical planets which are there and stuff like that.
Right.
And that kind of makes sense, Capricorn being Saturn's home, Aquarius being Saturn's home, all these kind of things make sense. But then these three are not having any ownership, maybe because they help us go beyond the confines of just this zodiac of
Well, they
12.
do. They do
Exactly.
in modern astrology. So that's the discrepancy is in traditional astrology, the three newly discovered planets don't rule signs. In modern astrology, Pluto rules Scorpio, Uranus rules Aquarius, and Neptune rules Pisces. And
Sorry,
that's a
repeat that.
formula.
Pluto, Scorpius, so deep transformation. Got that. Next one
Pluto
was?
rules the sign of Scorpio.
Yeah.
Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius.
Okay.
And Neptune it rules Pisces. So if you look at
Hmm.
any person's birth chart, and let's say they have a stellium of planets in Scorpio, they got 5 planets in Scorpio right on top of each other. What house position is that Pluto in? It's going to make
Hmm.
all the difference in the world how that Scorpio is. If they got all of that Scorpio, then they've got Pluto in the first house, versus Pluto in the 12th house. That's going to be the difference between someone that could be like a saint or a
Hmm.
warrior.
That makes
So
so
you
much
have to look at
sense.
rulerships are a very
Yeah.
important technique in astrology. Yeah. And in modern astrology, those 3 planets are very important rulers of Scorpio, Aquarius, and Pisces.
That actually makes so much sense because in the Indian way of looking at the zodiac, they say that Pisces is basically the feet of Vishnu because it's the gateway out,
Mhm.
of this level of consciousness and out of Bhuloka, basically where we have taken physical incarnation. And
Right.
I love it that Neptune is basically resembling him and hence has been given ownership of Pisces. And I am starting to understand that basically the three are basically helping you get out of the clutches of the seven planets of this particular consciousness and transcend that. And that's why they are very useful for dimensional shifts. And I do
That's
believe
absolutely right. Mhm.
and I do believe, just out of maybe my own intuitive understanding, that heading into Aquarius overall will definitely have a lot of work on us coming from these three, because otherwise, that kind of a dimensional shift where the collective psychosis is realized by everyone that, a lot of us are asleep and shit, we never
Yes.
realized it, as well as everything, because just in our own lifetimes, things have started coming in which is like at the cusp of the previous age and the starting of this age, things which never existed, such as you said, we are technically transhuman already because this is the first extension of our us being a cyborg. basically, along with the internet, which came during our time, and then computers started entering everyone's homes, and then smartphones and everything. And I'm understanding a lot of the activity of especially Uranus now around all of this, because I'm actually starting to get excited a lot for the coming age. And I have a question over here. Why do the ages work in reverse order compared to normally how the planets orbit around the sun? Because they go from Aries to Taurus, etc. Besides the nodes, which are permanently retrograde, I believe. But why is it that the system of the ages is that we are coming out of Pisces and now entering Aquarius? Because the first time I came across us entering the golden age, or the Mayan calendar and ending at 2012, was basically, I thought it was the end of the age of Capricorn, when I had no idea about any of this. How is it that the eons of time are working in a reverse order?
That's right, my friend. We have an whole age of Aquarius to be followed by a whole age of Capricorn for our species for the many thousands of years to come.
Yeah.
So, this is one of the blurry lines in astrology because how ages are predicted is by using precession. So it's actually that the constellations seem to be moving backwards through the zodiac, and we see which constellation is aligned with the ecliptic on the spring equinox. That's how we determine astrological ages, but there's no fine line there. So no astrologer can really say, hey, the age of Aquarius begins on this date.
Mm,
Sometimes astrologers like to give that speculation, like we could say, hey, Pluto entering Aquarius, and we're entering an age of Aquarius generally this thousand of years. So we're going to see more of this Aquarian age getting spearheaded during this next 2-decade transit of Pluto through Aquarius. But honestly, this age shift happens over the course of centuries.
mm,
And what Jeffrey Green says is that it really matters the collective choices humanity makes.
mm,
What percentage of humanity is going to drag their heels, and what percentage of humanity is going to be willing to experiment and open the door to something different? And how are we handling that? Are we going to blow ourselves up? Are we going to enter another utopia? There's no guarantee. That depends on our collective choices. And
mm,
how we shift into this next stage and when exactly we shift into this next stage, I also believe is dependent on collective choices. It's not an easy question to answer, and I don't think you can ever really assign a
mm,
particular date to it. It happens over the course of a long period of time, and what it's mostly reflected in is the change of our collective belief system. So
mm,
the age of Pisces had so much to do with blind faith, praying to the right God, and then you go to heaven, especially if you sacrificed and made yourself very low and humble, which is why the number one collective pathology collectively right now is this deranged spiritual masochism that we should
mm,
somehow be not selfish to the point of self-punishment, or not selfish to the point of not experiencing pleasure or enjoyment. Again, I had a Hare Krishna phase. I know how hell-bent they are on demonizing the senses as well
mm,
as sexuality and the body. And that creates huge problems in culture and society. For example, the Hare Krishnas have incredibly high divorce rates, even though they're giving, assigned marriages. These are fundamental problems that needs to be
mm,
exposed, it needs to be talked about. The point is, our collective belief systems are changing. And as we enter Aquarian age, they're going to be increasingly scientific. It's less about what you believe, blind faith yourself to heaven. It's what is humanity? We see it. We understand the interconnection between the individual, the species, and quite frankly, God. Now we're
mm,
starting to understand God in an increasingly scientific way. We're
mm,
going to understand time and interconnectivity. And oh my God, there's higher forces that are affecting everything on this planet scientifically.
mm. 100%. Uh, you
There's a lot
touched
of
on
tension
something
in
which I'll
between
come back
ages.
to, with regards to the spiritual masochism, um, and the proportional or maybe inverse relationship when it comes to the sensuality or the sexuality and the pleasure and all of that. So now when we know about, Aquarius, for example, where sovereignty is going to burst out in a lot of ways, starting from the individual. Like, my understanding was that up until now, society is running top down, the forces of power, the forces of whoever is higher in that triangle of power is basically governing the rest of society. But I believe a change is going to come bottoms up. People are going to start waking up in their own individual ways, start affecting every electromagnetic field around them. They're going to be the real micro influencers, basically. And hence, the change is going to come. But what I would like to know is that, does everything traditional go, or are there some aspects of tradition or the traditional values, no matter which culture they're coming from, etc., which society or humanity will still hold on to, because maybe according to the laws of nature they still might be valid and make sense?
Yes. So this is another brilliant question that we can use to cut straight to the heart of where astrology can be most useful. And this is where I really liked that you were already correlating some of these forces of nature. Like you said, hey, Pluto, I'm hearing how that's getting correlated with Shiva. And that makes sense because Shiva represents all of these functions and qualities. And that's what we're learning by studying the zodiac and the planets, is that there's highly specific functions and qualities that we're discovering, which are cross-cultural, which are inherent in nature. They are not man-made. So how did all of these different cultures spread all across the earth many tens of thousands of years ago have a working understanding of astrology with 12 zodiac signs? It's because cross-culturally we were tuned into nature. And nature has an archetypal symbolic language. You could say that astrology is the language of God. Makes total, perfect, absolute sense. But that's what we're discovering is, hey, any culture you find Mercury, any culture you find Venus, and they always have the same relevance. They always have the same function. So honestly, to restore humanity back to its golden age, we are cross-culturally discovering this archetypal reality. And it doesn't matter what tradition or culture you come from. So guess what? That's never going to change, ever. The zodiac will always be the zodiac. The gods will always be the gods, but we're all evolving simultaneously.
Wow.
We're evolving every time the planets go through the zodiac. It's not just simply a circle, but a spiral. And this happens in our lives as well. We may have noticed we have particular themes and we get this experience time and time again. But every time we have this experience, it's not quite the same because we approach it differently. And we've learned and grown since the last time. So there's this repeating of a pattern, Saturn. It's always crystallized the same. It's always going to be the wheel of samsara in a certain respect. And that wheel of samsara is not just a pointless punishment, it's driving the locomotive engine of evolution. And this is the relationship, by the way, between Saturn, which holds us down into gravity, which is important. We need that. We need tradition. We need to preserve the wisdom of the past and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It evolves. It will get brought forward into the age of Aquarius in new and different ways. And that's what we see through these different age shifts, is that the collective belief system is changing, but we don't throw everything out. The issue that does happen, there's a very big issue that happens during age shifts, and that is a huge amount of collective tension. So we're going to see so many people actually dig their heels into traditionalism. No, we're losing all the good things, and we need more racism and more genocide because that's what our daddies did, And then we're going to see that in tension with like way more atheistic, scientific beliefs are going to start coming in, and then they're going to start mixing and they're going to start clashing. This happens during every age shift. For example, the prior age shift is when Rome went from, worshiping so many different gods, and then takes over, and it takes over by force. Everyone's forced into Christianity once it does take over. That was an age shift.
The Crusades and everything.
Another age shift is when Egypt and Babylon fell. That was the age of Taurus. That was high Venus. And then what gets demonized at the end of the age of Taurus? Venus gets demonized. And we turn Egypt and Babylon into evil civilizations. They were crumbling and they had all sorts of distortions. But then there's this tension It's too bad we threw away so much of Egypt and Babylon. It's too bad we burned the Library of Alexandria. This is age shift stuff. That's when collective belief systems change, and it's oftentimes through burning libraries and shit like that that it unfortunately takes place.
So
I
okay,
think
so
entering Aquarius, it's going to be us getting our minds smashed with scientific discoveries, and it's just going to
yeah, yeah,
change our
yeah.
reality.
Like I do a bunch of writing because originally when I came onto Instagram, I used to write these super long captions, and before it became what it became now, back then I used to have like massive engagement. Even with a very limited following, I used to have like 300, 400 comments. My writings used to be so long, they used to overflow from the caption space, and I had to write the rest in a comment, etc. But then I just left it because now I call Instagram Titstagram because of the amount of the direction of porn where it is going is just like too much. Every next door girl turning into something, and I'm not questioning their choices or telling them what to do, but it's not out of their own choice. They are actually being programmed, and that's the sad part. Sexuality can also be your power, but you are not even realizing when some corporation is basically using you as a product, especially with your sexual nature. So I stopped writing there, but like I write on Telegram now. I write in my own notes and then I keep sharing over there. And I wrote one thing where I could just see crystal clear that the more advanced science is going to get, the more spiritual is going to, more spiritual truth is it going to actually discover. Because what I found science to be up until now is basically a way to validate something, or the ability to test something, and then you can say, yeah, that it exists. But the thing is, if it exists, it doesn't care whether science can validate it or not. If it exists, it exists. And I would say that just the scientific method of observation and testing and evidence, etc., I don't think that should be the only way of discovering something new or coming across something new. Otherwise, for example, Jeffrey Green would have never come out with evolutionary astrology because it came through a dream you know
It's
and
not ontological evidence. We can prove it with statistics and experience and
hmm,
observation and correlation. That is the scientific method. But what the
hmm,
ontological evidence of what energy Saturn's
hmm.
radiating out, we don't know that. And we don't need to know that is the point.
Yeah,
We have all the evidence in life experience itself.
yeah, yeah. No, so that's great. So I'm happy to know that at least some of the traditional aspects where nature will always remain nature, Prakriti and Purush, that will still exist in some shape or form. Only the outward understanding and the outward expression is going to, go through a lot of friction, both at a collective stage, at an individual stage. 100%, I'm personally also experiencing it. But it's good to know that, the deep rooted tradition, which comes from nature, not man made belief systems, is going to stay, and that's great to know. But you also, in the Pluto and Aquarius video, where you were speaking about something, you said that there will be an increase in the robotic heartless people as well. So how is that going to play out with the rest of the population, which technically, let's say, just for the sake of this conversation, we put it at 25%, the ones who are kind of awake, and now that quantity is going to increase. But then if the robotic and heartlessness is also going to increase, um, what the hell happens then? Because I find it hard that both can coexist in the same reality. I do understand all of us have our own bubbles, and our own bubbles are our own reality, but for the sake of overall peace or harmony or love to spread around, where do those lines dissolve into some sort of yoga or union?
That's a good question. First, before I get there, I want to speak to your comment about Instagram because I do have a personal reflection for that.
Hmm.
I've been one of those people who's just been on the internet since the dawn of it. You may have too. It's like as soon as the internet was around, get me on there. Let's discover the world. Let's learn as much as we can with this brand new technology. That's also part of my chart. My progress has happened a lot through breaking rules. And
Mm,
when the internet was first introduced, you did not have these like
mm,
Instagram and Facebook and MySpace. That is a new phenomenon and it affected the entire direction of the internet. It was going in a very Uranian Aquarian direction. And then what happens? Saturn comes and takes it over. This happens always throughout time. This is what happens in religion as well. Jesus
mm,
Christ comes and then the take over and it goes in the opposite fucking direction. This is a Saturn Uranian function. It is always going to be a driving mechanism in all of our evolution, individually, collectively. That's what's always going on. So the reason I'm speaking to this is I want to give myself a little plug here that a few years ago I created RosalilaCommunity.com. And I jumped on that as soon as I could. And I was so excited because there was finally a platform that was allowing for creators to make their own websites the way it was at the dawn of the internet. The dawn of the internet, you had these BBS, bulletin board style websites, and they were forums and they were like their own little subcultures. And it was awesome. It was awesome. It was so much better. And Facebook just literally has destroyed the progress of the internet and technology as much as they could. I mean, I hate Facebook and like more than most people because he literally could have done so much good for humanity and ran that shit straight into the ground as hard as he possibly could have. So again, I'm excited because I'm hosting my own community. It's not on Instagram and I don't have to deal with any of that bullshit. So again, maybe you could work something out because I'm trying to design a platform to help other content creators get their platform set up outside of these bureaucracies that are killing the creative ingenuity of our species. That's what Saturn does. That's why the mythos is Saturn eats his own children. You'll have to forgive me though. I completely spaced on what your question was before that. My apologies.
So my question was basically about the increasingly robotic and heartless people, that particular population, as well as the population which is trying to center itself in its heart, understand what its heart truly wants, embrace it, and then embody it regardless of how much resistance it might be from the ego or from the outside world. So between the set of budding, sovereign, new humane beings versus the ones who are going deeper in the sleeping matrix, basically, for all of us to exist on the same planet, ultimately we do need to dissolve our differences at some particular level. And obviously love is going to be that unification force. But then when do you see that happening? Because what I personally feel, even though I'm not saying this from a point of astrology, I'm saying this from a point of a lot many years of understanding geopolitics and a bunch of other things, along with some inner abilities of my own which have suddenly started showing themselves in the past few years when doctors were trying to label me as crazy, basically. But I didn't know that I was waking up in some other ways. I personally see a lot of destruction coming very soon. I see a lot of conflict, chaos. I see a lot of that, and in a bunch of crazy ways. I see that even happening within the masculine and the feminine energies. I see a birth of and a recovering of the feminine energy within the masculine form, and I see the opposite happening in the feminine. So whether it's from the masculine feminine energetic principle side of things, whether it is countries fighting each other, whether it is countries having fighting within them, I see a lot of, in our lifetimes, especially in the near future, friction, you know. But and I do hope that whether in our lifetime or not, sooner or later, for the sake of the planet, for the sake of overall a feeling of comfort and ease in the ether, which I don't think exists today. That's why somebody like you is living a little far out. That's why somebody like me now is very isolated and very private as a person, whereas I'm a very joy-loving and sociable person, but I'm the complete opposite now, the way I'm living. So I would love that sooner or later the world finds that harmony, whether you're a part of the sleeping matrix, whether you're part of the new awakened ones. Because as you have been talking about these new age spiritual people, which is obviously a major community in the United States, that they are sometimes thinking of themselves as better than the ones who are asleep. But whether it's the ones who are asleep, whether it's the ones who are waking up, either way, when we will go through stuff which comes from the top, whether government wise, whether the new culture, the new trend, all of us have to go through it in some shape or form. So we all get affected together because we are all connected in some way or another. So where will it happen, or when will it happen, that when and how will it happen that those lines of divide? Because the kind of conversation we have, if we have with some regular person of society, they'll definitely think we are crazy, and that's fine with us. We embrace our craziness. But the thing is that whatever we could learn from them, if there is something we could benefit from, whatever they could learn from us, and if together we could rise, I don't see that happening right now. When can that start happening?
That again is what's keeping me up all night, is I'm so passionate. Like, what needs to be cracked? What code, what formula needs to be cracked so we can do exactly what we're discussing, which is break down the Saturnarian oppression and start to bring in this upliftment collectively to the species, to the culture, to the society. I mean, I'm so passionate about this. So what you have identified is one of the biggest pitfalls that can take place as we're entering the Aquarius age. And that's some of what we want to identify. We don't want to just identify all this technology in progress. We're all going to enter into a next renaissance. I'm not so sold on that. I think there's going to be pockets of that. I think there's potential for that. There's no guarantee for that. So, absolutely, what is the pitfall of Aquarius? I can use evolutionary astrology as an example. I'm trying to introduce this system that's going to help us to scientifically evaluate our soul and our specific stage of evolution. Well, guess what? That's what they were doing many, many thousands of years ago that accidentally landed the caste system, right?
Oh, oh,
So
oh.
that's a real problem, isn't it? I'm literally starting to teach, no, we're not all Pisces one. We're not
Mm,
all on the same page. Three-quarters of the population isn't able to think for themselves in a
mm,
consensus stage of evolution. Now, does that not create a problem for what has always historically been the ruling class? These are the actual issues in human psychology collectively that we have not begun to map out. But where it could absolutely get to its worst case scenario is if we had any type of Holocaust like ideas, like
mm,
this is, these are the chosen and these are not the chosen. And now we're using some type of scientific evaluation to do that.
mm,
That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario, I think, is we look at every single human pathology and mental disorder and we map that out and we find out what those people are missing and what they need as to correct that horrible catastrophe from taking place. The shadow of the age of Pisces is this distortion of moralism. And this is how trackable this stuff is. We're not seeing the shadow of Aquarius now. We'll see it 1,000 years from now. We didn't see the shadow of Pisces at the beginning of Pisces 2,000 years ago. We saw it about 1,000 years ago. And where the
mm,
Pisces age really got distorted is when they wrote the Garden of Eden myth, in
mm,
which case Adam and Eve is born via original sin. And now we're
mm,
dirty and we're impure, and we got to purify ourselves. And this is
mm,
again this Pisces masochism. I'm not clean enough. I got to sacrifice. I got to follow Christ. So I got to pin myself up on a cross. I'm not clean enough. I can't be naked. And again, what gets damned? Sexuality. How did we damn the origin of life itself so effectively than through the Garden of Eden myth? And how many distortions that's formed where now you have pedophile suppressing their sexuality. And who are the most dangerous people on the planet? Them. So these are issues in collective belief systems. What seeds being sown for Aquarius today could very well distort into the problems of tomorrow. So we need to be talking about all of that as well, because we
mm.
need to do major damage prevention before that could ever take place. No one believes in the zodiac or astrology now, so nobody cares. What if there's a government body that starts using astrology to put people into, different systems that we don't think that's possible today? What about 1,000 years from now?
Yeah,
We need to
because
start preparing for that today.
obviously the shadow side of anything starts becoming visible when it starts creeping out of the shadows, and that takes a lot of time. So 100%, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think we are at a very precarious stage that way because it could go in any direction. Um, but hopefully, with the kind of work all of us are trying to do, the amount of compassion overall, and the amount of love, and the amount of deleting the illusion of separation from our eyes, I hope that happens so that we can all understand how everything is connected. And it's whether it's the caste thing, whether it's religion, whether it's the priests, like, and we are able to see beyond the labels and actually feel the truth even without the need for scientifically verifying it, or trying to become detectives around it. What was very interesting and came to my mind was when you spoke about the myth of Adam and Eve in terms of polluting the people or making them think that they're polluted. Now, what I'm going to bring around is something which I've been personally experiencing since more than a couple of years now. All right. So, because I also saw you say in the Pluto and Aquarius again this thing that you said something about libido and the kind of relation of the will to live with it. All right. Now that's very interesting for me because now what has been happening with me personally is that in the past 2, 3 years, like I was an extremely sexual person, right? Like I literally used to say, and in my own language in Hindi, where it does sound a little crude, but I used to say that in fucking I see God. All right. And it's literally on one of my original YouTube videos, like from the starting times when I had started in English, but then I realized that to help my own countrymen I need to speak in Hindi, and then I started speaking in that, and I've always been unfiltered as hell. So that is the way I knew myself. All right. Because even the word evolution within evolutionary astrology, whether you use it in terms of psychology, whether you use it in terms of behavior, whether you use it in terms of um, why we are the ones who are born out of a million different sperms, is because of that drive of libido, because we are born to basically survive and then to reproduce at the most basal level. All right. Now, I was hyper basal on that level. All right. And that's how my life was. But then, since all these things started happening to me, along with obviously a shit ton of trauma, like even though I had gone through a lot of horrendous times, starting all the way back in 2013, depression, complete resistance to believing that, because even before I started doing this work, people used to come to me for advice. So I had some ego, that how can I be depressed? Like I'm the one who helps other people before even I was in this particular work. So, but again, then finally acceptance, and then had to take the medication, this, that, etc. Then that chapter was like done and dusted. But then the real shit in life began, which I had no preparation for or no idea about. And then within a span of 3 years, at least 4 times I should have gone. And this is not suicidal talk. This is like the impact of the things which happened to me would actually kill a person. All right. And that is when I started diving into astrology, because I need to understand like what the hell. So, but what happened in this particular period where everything, everything, all right, it wasn't just some relationship, it wasn't work, it wasn't my sense of identity, everything got destroyed. And before I could even understand what blow have I been delivered, the next one used to arrive. All right. So in going through that, what happened to me, which at first made me question like, where am I? My libido is gone. I don't know if my libido is gone, or if now I'm not interested in women anymore the way I was interested before, or maybe the kind of feminine radiation I would, attract with is not that easy to find. I don't know what the hell it is, but sex literally started disappearing from my life. And I don't know whether it was out of habit or what, but when, that pattern in which I was very sexual as a person and never using it in a bad way, never lying, to get into sexual relationships of any kind, whatever the hell it was, it all started feeling very foreign to me. But the behavioral patterns were there, right? So in the initial times, I started realizing that, okay, like when I was having it, that it wasn't me who's having it anymore. And then I don't want to disrespect a woman. I don't ever want to make a woman feel like she's not attractive. But normally, a lot of women, that's the first reaction they have when, as a man, you would not want to have sex with them when they are actually gorgeous. So it came to a point where I had to, really maintain an invisible distance from women, that even now that they themselves try to approach me, but like the way I've become is that they feel that there is some wall around this guy. And I don't know why that happened. And what I am interested to know is that since it is quite closely in correlation with the way I started waking up at a different level of intensity, I was waking up since I was very young, all right, but at a different level of intensity. So when you said about libido relating to the will to live, I was wondering that normally is it because there was some sort of waking up or spiritual awakening or whatever it is that I started becoming disinterested in sex and stuff. But because I don't think sex is non-godly, I don't think it is non-divine. I do think it is divine. Yes, it's not that possible for me to now just do it because it's possible to do it with one of the most attractive women who everybody's after, and she doesn't give herself to anyone. But that feeling of victory, power, reward, which would happen at, a immature masculine level when it comes to sexual conquest. None of that is happening. I don't know if it's because of that. I don't know if it's because internally I'm growing more, but I definitely don't want to lose my will to live. So that's what that's the kind of curiosity which came to me, coming when you brought this Adam and Eve myth around, and when I heard you in that video. So, any light you can shed on that?
Oh, yeah, you just hit the jackpot again. I mean, I want to do a whole nother interview just on this stuff. And it's really, really relevant stuff to me. And part of VA is you can get down to the nitty-gritty of understanding, where your soul was in past lifetimes and what strings of ages you've had and how it's all interconnected. So like I had a high sexual point in Egypt, Babylon, right? And
Hmm.
to be a priest in Egypt, Babylon, you were hypersexual. It's all about
Hmm.
sex in Egypt, Babylon. Then when we get the era in sex is bad and demonized, and in this lifetime I have some rectification to do around that. I obviously have karma around that. I had my phase, I did the self flagellation thing and all of that, so it's like, okay, this is really relevant, and I'm exactly with you. I mean, this is witchcraft, pagans, any indigenous spiritual natural teaching is sex is life, period. Sex
Hmm.
is life, period. So yeah, let's get over it and stop just like laughing at penises and vaginas like it's funny, because that's obviously a result of Victorian era suppression, and sex is
Hmm.
life. Like those jokes aren't funny at all. You can make anything into a sexual innuendo because anything's inherently sexual. So let's get over this shit, people. Um,
Yeah. That's
now,
and
what
that's
I
what my
spoke,
sense of humor and my expression was literally centered around. You know,
sure, well, you probably got some Scorpio in
my
your
like my
chart.
first my first video on
It could
YouTube
still
is
be
how to lick.
funny.
My first video on YouTube is how to lick pussy, and I'm an Indian person.
Well, and you're wondering why your views went down. When's the last time you did one of those?
Yeah.
We're starting to see, it's starting to make more sense here. No, it's all in jest. And the reason why I did bring this up is I mentioned it in the Pluto Aquarius video, but this is actually very tied to our forthcoming eclipse, April 8th. You got a total solar eclipse in Aries, the exact degree of Chiron, the wounded healer. So you were talking about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. No, we're way ahead than that. I'm talking about Chiron. I'm talking about asteroids. It gets really, really, really beyond. That's the pioneering work that I'm doing. But again, you don't have to believe in this stuff. You don't have to believe in astrology. It's still going to affect everybody. And what we see is what we're going to get. So this libido thing, it's a collective thing. And first of all, I really applaud your endeavor. It sounds healthy. It sounds like maturing to me mostly, but I will admit I'm right there with you, and I'm starting to feel a little bit of this crisis, because it's like, wait a minute, this used to be my jet fuel. Like this
Hmm.
used to be excitement. When I was having a bad day, I could turn it into a good day, and now I don't really care that much. And I'm pretty sure it's not just my age. I know we reach our high point, men, like when we're 18, so that kind of sucks, first of all. But it's like, I'm pretty sure it's more than just that. And
Yeah.
so this is
100%.
actually a collective crisis of this Chiron and Aries, is in some way, shape, or form we're going to experience this all in highly unique ways. But one of the ways that I best describe Chiron and Aries is we have this wounded experience of like getting punched in the gut and the wind gets knocked out of us. So there's an actual collective crisis in will to live, energy, physicality, sexuality, and how it all goes together, because it's all under the umbrella of Mars and Aries. And as
Hmm.
we're healing our libido, as we're healing our will to live, it also has so much to do with anger, which we kicked off this, interview talking about anger. We have to heal our relationship to anger, to energize us, to get back up on our horse. There's going to be highly unique ways that we are initiating new paths to get that will to live back online through embracing desire. And this is, again, the most anti-spiritual spiritual teaching I'm going to give to you right now, because we damned Aries for thousands of years in spiritual traditions. Witches love to have sex. Again, the sovereign people, they've been preserving it while they're getting burnt at the stake for being so-called devil worshippers, etc. They're really into sex, though. A lot of this paganism is just rooted in Celtic tradition, and it's very sexual oriented spiritual philosophy here. um, where was I going? I lost my train of thought here.
You were
You
talking
had
about Chiron coming into Aries and the eclipse
that's
and,
right.
the collective
That's right.
decline in the libido, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's desire. We're experiencing a crisis of desire. Chiron's the wounded healer. Wherever Chiron is in the zodiac, we have a three-part process. Of first, we experience wounding that initiates our journey of finding medicine. Chiron, the myth is he's an immortal centaur who gets hit in the hoof with a poison dart. And so he's suffering immensely, and he travels the whole world looking for medicine to heal this wound, and he becomes the master healer, the master teacher. He starts the first school in Athens. So that's what Chiron is. It rules
Wow.
where we're broken and where we're hurt is where the light enters, is where we become teachers and healers. And this is a collective truth. Again, there's a very Christ-like essence to this Chiron placement. Because we're seeing such a highlighted Chiron time collectively, especially the first half of 2024, we are seeing an increase of global suffering, as you pointed out at the beginning of this interview, which is going to catalyze global response. Grassroots movements, new charitable movements, the more that we hurt, the more compassionate we become. And Chiron transits are so measurable, you can literally watch the waves and collective rise of crises and charitable activities happen simultaneously. Okay, so we're in one of those this spring. Aries season, we have the solar eclipse with Chiron, and this is one of the collective crises. You could call it the wounded masculine is needing to heal itself with Chiron and Aries. So there's going to be warriors that need to initiate themselves, and there's people that need to free themselves. There's going to be a hot period of separations in relationships, because why are we with this person? They don't even do anything that we like. We don't like them, so let's separate. And what that means is we have to aim towards desire. This is where the north node's transiting. This is how important the moon's nodes are. You look at where the north node is transiting in any year. That's what the whole collective is learning and evolving towards. So we're learning Aries. And what do Aries people like to do? They like to be daredevils. They like to jump out of airplanes or go rock climbing, or they're the UFC people, those natural gladiators,
Yeah.
these football players. They were actual gladiators in their
Yeah.
past lives on the
All
soul
out
level.
Mars. All out Mars, no Jupiter. Just dive into it.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, do we need to demonize these people? Holy shit. These are the people that win wars. We need our warriors. And every single one of us on the individual level is healing our inner warrior and is liberating that. And what that means is we need desire. And what is desire? Is that what you have right now? You don't desire that. You desire what you don't have over there, right? The Hawkeye, Mars, has its eye on its goal and its target because it wants it. And that's sex, right? Sex is one of those big Hawkeye, I want to have sex with that person, and we have desire. So how are we using desire to motivate our life? We actually need this tension between where we are now and where we want to be. That's one way of using desire. The other way is this Martian anger function, where sometimes we got to use this tension to separate. So just as much as you spoke about this Aquarian age being this age where hopefully we're interconnecting in new ways, it's also an age where we are realizing we need to separate. We are not meant to be in the cults we were born into, even if that's the cult of the nuclear family. We are not meant to be in the cults we are born into, even if that's the cult of our intimate relationship. So what we aren't taught in a lot of new age or contemporary religion or spirituality is that it is the dance between union and separation that allows for love to grow. And for all of us in intimate relationships, we're going to be learning more of this dance necessarily. It's part of the collective evolutionary necessity. And that's something that also distinguishes evolutionary astrology. We know that it's a lot more than karma driving someone's experience. Someone may have a really challenging experience, not just because they fucked up in a past life. Their soul wants that intense experience for the reason of evolutionary necessity. There's somewhere the soul wants to go, and that tension is just driving us towards that. That's the case, I believe, with our experience of a crushed libido. Right now, I'm exactly right there with you, and I'm trying to find solutions. I don't yet have them figured out.
Wow.
That's going to be our forthcoming eclipse. And I think that it is going to birth new directions in new ways. For example, as you mentioned, you're going through a shift in how you used to be sexual. You'll be sexual again. You're just going through a transformation of how.
Hmm. Wow. Uh, Again, like I'm exploding on many different aspects, with like everything which you said, because a bunch of it relates to um, whatever understanding I have of certain mythologies, cultures, etc. A bunch of it is hitting very hard at certain intuitive feelings I've had. So, for example, I'll talk about when you mentioned about the myth of Chiron being the centaur who got, hit in the hoof. First of all, that's a very similar parallel to Achilles. Only the next part of the journey is different. But him turning into the pioneer for healing, and that also of an animal which is again of a horse-like nature, is very similar to the first asterism or nakshatra in the Vedic system, where you have Ashwini as the first nakshatra within Aries, and its deities are supposed to be the Ashwin Kumars, who are the twin brothers, who are basically the master healers. You know, so that's another parallel which started to like shake me up inside and like draw a bunch of different dots.
It's
Uh,
interesting you brought up Achilles because in the Greek mythos, Chiron actually takes Achilles in under his wing and trains Achilles to be the master warrior.
okay.
He trains
Wow.
Achilles in how to heal all wounds. That's part of the mythos.
Wow. And then another thing which you said about there's going to be a lot of separation in relationships in this particular year, especially. So in India, the winter time, like starting November, December, January, it's basically like a wedding season. It's like a festival of weddings everywhere. All right. Now, I'm not a part of society, so I don't participate much in any of this, nor do I get invited that much, you know. But the thing is that even when I do get invited, I don't end up going. And the thing is that I was traveling a lot in India in November. I drove literally from where I am all the way up till north, where the Himalayas are, and came back the whole way. And I was seeing weddings everywhere. And whenever I saw this, an internal feeling within me was telling me, I've actually, I didn't write this and put it out because I didn't want to dishearten people who might be getting married. I got a feeling that whoever was getting married, especially around that time in November, December, something within me was telling me that all these marriages, most of them are going to break apart. All right. Because especially in India, again, marriage is actually more of a market in a lot of ways. So that's another thing which you have spoken about, which is hitting me very much in terms of the way I was understanding things via just pure inference from within. And the third thing about the eclipse and the relation to the wounded masculine, another thing which I felt is that starting this year, I have a feeling that, and this is not to say one gender is better, one gender is worse, nothing like that. But overall, my understanding has that men are being lesser men in the recent history which we have seen. All right, whether you even take biological markers such as testosterone, or whether you look at how honorable men are today compared to the amount of honor, internal resilience, fortitude, etc., they had a long time back. And we've seen a decline in that. And because of that, we've seen shame, we've seen addictions of pornography, we've seen a lot of repression within men, we've seen a lot of power balance shifts between the masculine and the feminine in some very crazy ways. All right. And I have a feeling, and I even put this out in some conversation I had with a client of mine, that starting this year onwards, I have a feeling that the masculine is going to start coming back into its form. But I hope and I will strive to make sure that it happens in a healthy way, not just in like a plain Andrew Tate way or, something like that. It happens in a healthy way. And I have a feeling that that is going to happen. Whereas for the women, like what I was feeling was that women are unfortunately going to go through some pain. I don't know why I was feeling that, but it could also be because of the very Nazi aspects of feminism, which have impacted people's life choices, which after gaining maturity, now they're going to start realizing might have hurt them in certain ways. And I got that feeling, and I love it when you mentioned about this particular eclipse going to have a lot of things to do with this wounded masculine stuff. And I also love that you're taking the satellites of not just the Earth and the Moon and the nodes, but you bring in, because I came across this in your videos for the first time about things like Chiron and even some other ones like I don't remember right now, but like all these planets, especially the far out ones, have their own moons, and I loved it as to like how you brought them in as well as the asteroids in. But this wounded masculine one is going to be very interesting for me personally because like a lot of my work has to do with masculinity overall. And wow, that's just
Well, it's going to be a good time for you. Yes, and I am reading the same thing, like this progress back and forth, back and forth. It's like, we're always moving in these extremes. So, I mean, even in the 10 years that I've been doing astrology, it's always been patriarchy, 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 the rise of the feminine, the rise of the feminine, the rise of the feminine. And I'm super dedicated to this, and I've largely been talking about this for 10 years. And boy, can it get bent out of whack. I've
mm,
identified the issues where it's like, the root of patriarchy is sexual stuff. It's
mm,
when men started to reclaim their power by saying, we're the origins of the babies because we give you all the seed. So it's actually us. We're the progenitors. That's
mm,
actually the root of all patriarchy. Now we're seeing feminism go so starkly anti-male that it's recreating patriarchy inverted. It's like we don't need men
mm,
at all. And it's just shooting yourself in the foot the same way patriarchy did. We shot ourselves in the foot by damning the best parts of life.
mm,
So, yeah, pendulum swings both ways and it just goes back and forth and really needs to. It's the mechanism, but we are trying to get into a balance, and it's going to have to be in a much more balanced direction. Certainly, the gender revolution that's just barely beginning, we're going to see that one take off hot this next year, too. So, masculine, feminine, it's everybody is, needing to change these definitions in certain ways and liberate themselves in certain ways. And women need to do it in certain ways, but then not go too far, and men just the same, because there is a lot of male emasculation taking
mm,
place, especially
mm,
in these most spiritual circles. Why? Because just like how I began, I see all of the sexual abuse, like you said. Do we
mm,
want to be a part of the problem? No. So we end up demasculating ourselves. There needs to be a balance here. We need
mm,
our warriors online and fighting and using anger in the healthy way. And I'm a
mm,
Bhagavad Gita person. This life is not about copping out and running away. There is a
mm.
good fight to be fought.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. On that note, Timothy, like for me, the part of this conversation which is going to go out has come to a conclusion. If you have more time, I would love to continue conversing with you, but we can, I think, stop the recording. But just before that, I would like to tell everyone, whoever's listening to this, please just watch any video of his on YouTube just to understand that poetic expression which I'm talking about, which will hit you regardless of whether you know astrology or not. And you can find him on Rasa Leela Healing, which is RASALILAHEALING. And YouTube is definitely the first way where I would love for anyone who's listening to this to, get a feeling of who Timothy is. And after that, of course, all his other links and everything, I would put it, or the team will put it wherever this thing is going. So definitely the full version will go on Spotify as well as YouTube might even have clips, etc. And anything you want to add for the people, Timothy, or anything you want to ask even me in front of people?
Thank you for tuning in. Anyone out there with any interest or any passion in any of what we just mentioned in this super groundbreaking interview, I just applaud you, and find the others, find the like minds, and I'm excited for what's to come. And thank you again, Sarhad. I've been excited since you mentioned this interview. I just had the feeling you were going to be the perfect person to talk about the stuff that really matters, and I would love to do more down the line as well.
100%.
Thank you, brother.
100%.